Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm reading some workplace drama stories that will either put you to sleep or keep you wide awake questioning humanity. So grab whatever you're working on, get comfortable, and let's jump into some peak workplace chaos. These stories are straight from various workplace subreddits, and trust me, some of these people definitely need to find new jobs. Anyway, let's get started. My boss made me work through my grandmother's funeral because we had a client meeting. I've been working at this mid-sized consulting firm for about 3 years now, and I generally love my job. The work is interesting, my colleagues are great, and the pay is decent for someone in their late 20s. My boss, Trevor, has always been demanding but fair, or so I thought until last month when everything changed. My grandmother, who practically raised me after my parents divorced, had been battling cancer for the past year. She was 84 and had lived an incredibly full life, but watching her decline was heartbreaking. When she passed away 2 weeks ago, I was devastated, but also relieved that her suffering was over. I immediately called Trevor to let him know I needed time off for the funeral arrangements and the service itself. The funeral was scheduled for Thursday, and I asked for Thursday and Friday off to handle everything and spend time with family. Trevor's response was not what I expected. He said that Thursday was problematic because we had a crucial client presentation that had been scheduled for months. He suggested I attend the meeting and then drive to the funeral afterward. I explained that the funeral was 3 hours away and started at 2 p.m, while our client meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. and typically ran until at least 1 p.m. There was no way I could make both. Trevor then suggested we reschedule the funeral. I stared at him in disbelief and explained that you can't just reschedule a funeral like it's a dentist appointment. Family members had already made travel arrangements, the church was booked, and the cemetery had a specific time slot. He seemed annoyed and said that client relationships were the foundation of our bus. And that missing this particular meeting could cost us a 6-figure contract. He reminded me that my grandmother wouldn't know if I was there or not, but our client definitely would notice my absence. I felt sick to my stomach but didn't know how to respond. I needed this job, and Trevor had always been reasonable before. Maybe he was right that the client meeting was more important in the long run. I called my aunt to explain the situation, and she was furious. She said family comes first and that any decent employer would understand. But she also knew I was supporting myself and couldn't afford to lose my job. We decided I would attend the client meeting and try to make it to the burial portion of the service if possible. The client meeting went well, but it ran until 1:30 p.m. as I had predicted. I grabbed my suit from my office and drove like a maniac to get to the cemetery. I arrived just as they were lowering the casket, my family already gathered around the grave. My aunt saw me rushing across the grass in my business clothes, clearly stressed and out of breath. Everyone could see I had prioritized work over saying goodbye to the woman who had been like a mother to me. The worst part was that the client contract fell through anyway. 2 days later, they decided to go with a competitor who had submitted a lower bid. All of Trevor's talk about how crucial this meeting was turned out to be meaningless. I had missed my grandmother's funeral for absolutely nothing. When I brought this up to Trevor, he shrugged and said, "That's just how business works sometimes." He showed no remorse about forcing me to choose between my job and my family. Since then, I've been looking for a new position, but the job market is tough right now. I'm stuck working for someone who thinks client meetings are more important than basic human decency. My family has been supportive, but I know they're disappointed that I wasn't there when it mattered most. The guilt is eating me alive, and I keep replaying that day, wondering if I should have just refused to attend the meeting and dealt with the consequences later. That story is absolutely heartbreaking and infuriating at the same time. The fact that Trevor had the audacity to suggest rescheduling a funeral shows just how disconnected some managers are from basic human empathy. And then for the client contract to fall through anyway makes it even more tragic. Sometimes standing up for what's right is worth more than keeping a job with someone who has no soul. Let's move on to another workplace nightmare that'll make you grateful for your current situation. I discovered my coworker has been stealing credit for my work for 2 years and got promoted because of it. I work in the marketing department of a tech startup, and I've been there for about 2.5 years. When I started, I was paired with another employee named Rachel, who'd been there for about 6 months longer than me. She was supposed to help me learn the ropes and get familiar with our systems and processes. Rachel seemed friendly and helpful at first, always offering to review my work and give feedback before I submitted anything to our manager. I thought she was being a good mentor and was grateful for the guidance. What I didn't realize was that she was systematically taking credit for every good idea I had. Our department works on various campaigns and projects, and I'm naturally creative with a background in graphic design and copywriting. I would come up with campaign concepts, write copy and design materials, then share everything with Rachel for her input. She would make minor suggestions, nothing substantial, and then I would refine the work and submit it to our manager through her, since she was technically my supervisor during my probationary period. After my probation ended, I expected to start submitting work directly to management, but Rachel convinced me that the current system was working well and that she could help ensure my work was presented in the best possible light. I trusted her judgment and continued the arrangement. Over the past 2 years, several of my campaigns have been incredibly successful. We've won industry awards, increased client engagement significantly, and generated substantial revenue for the company. I was proud of the work, but noticed that Rachel always seemed to be the one getting recognition during team meetings and company presentations. When I asked her about it, she said that, as the senior team member, she naturally represented our collaborative efforts, but that management knew about my contributions. I believed her because I didn't want to seem petty or credit hungry. Last month, everything changed when I accidentally saw an email Rachel had sent to our director. She was discussing a campaign that I had created entirely on my own, from concept to execution, and she was presenting it as her original idea. She mentioned that she had guided a junior team member in executing the vision, but claimed full creative ownership. I was shocked and started digging deeper into past communications. I discovered that Rachel had been systematically presenting my work as her own for the entire time we'd been working together. She would take my concepts, slightly modify the language, and present them as her original thinking. In team emails, she would say things like, "my campaign," or "my strategy," when referring to work I had done. She had even included my work in her portfolio for internal promotions. 3 weeks ago, Rachel was promoted to marketing manager, a position I had been hoping to apply for eventually. During the announcement, our director specifically mentioned her innovative thinking and creative problem solving as reasons for the promotion. He cited several campaigns that I had actually created as examples of her exceptional work. I realized that Rachel had built her entire reputation and career advancement on stealing my ideas and taking credit for my labor. I felt sick thinking about how naive I had been to trust her for so long. I decided to confront Rachel directly before taking the issue to management. When I showed her the evidence of what she had been doing, she initially tried to deny it. Then she claimed that as the senior team member, she'd been within her rights to present our team's work however she saw fit. She said that my ideas wouldn't have been successful without her guidance and refinement, so she deserved equal or greater credit. When I pointed out that she had been getting promotions and recognition while I remained in the same position, she said that was just how corporate hierarchies worked, and that I needed to be more assertive if I wanted credit for my contributions. She actually had the nerve to say that this experience should teach me about the importance of self-advocacy in the workplace. I took my evidence to HR and our director, including email threads, project files with timestamps, and examples of campaigns where I could prove original creation. The investigation took 2 weeks, during which Rachel tried to convince other co-workers that I was trying to sabotage her out of jealousy about her promotion. When the investigation concluded, HR determined that Rachel had indeed been misrepresenting the origin of work and taking inappropriate credit for collaborative projects. However, their solution was disappointing. Rachel received a formal reprimand and was required to attend training on proper attribution and team collaboration. She kept her promotion and salary increase, while I received a modest raise and a promise that future work would be properly attributed. The company said they couldn't reverse a promotion that had already been announced and implemented, as it would create too much disruption. Rachel now manages a different team, so I don't report to her anymore, but she's still in a higher position that she achieved through stealing my work. We occasionally interact in meetings, and she acts like nothing happened, even making comments about the importance of team collaboration and supporting junior colleagues. I've been looking for jobs at other companies, but it's frustrating that Rachel faces no real consequences for years of intellectual theft, while continuing to benefit from the career advancement she gained through deception. That story is absolutely maddening because it shows how broken some workplace systems really are. Rachel spent 2 years building her career on stolen work, got promoted because of it, and then faced basically zero consequences when caught. The fact that HR's solution was just some training and letting her keep the promotion shows they care more about avoiding disruption than actual justice. Sometimes the system protects the wrong people and honest workers get screwed over. Here's another workplace disaster that involves some seriously questionable management decisions. My manager started dating my ex-girlfriend and now makes my work life miserable. I work in the sales department of a mid-sized software company, and until 6 months ago, I actually enjoyed going to work every day. The team was solid, the targets were achievable, and my manager, Brad, seemed fair and professional. I'd been dating someone named Melissa for about 8 months when we broke up in January. It wasn't a messy breakup, just one of those situations where we realized we wanted different things in life. We stayed friendly and occasionally texted, but there was no drama or hard feelings. About 2 months after our breakup, I started noticing that Brad was acting differently around me. He became more critical of my work, started micromanaging my client calls, and would make subtle comments about my performance during team meetings. I couldn't figure out what had changed, since my sales numbers were actually above average, and I'd been getting positive feedback from clients. The mystery was solved when a co-worker mentioned seeing Brad and Melissa together at a restaurant downtown. Apparently, they'd been dating for several weeks, and it was getting serious. I was honestly fine with Melissa dating someone new, but I was concerned about the workplace implications since Brad was my direct supervisor. I decided to address it professionally by having a conversation with Brad about potential conflicts of interest. I approached him privately and mentioned that I'd heard he was seeing Melissa. I said I wanted to make sure our working relationship remained professional and that there wouldn't be any awkwardness. Brad's response was immediately defensive and hostile. He said his personal life was none of my business and that I was being presumptuous to even bring it up. He also made some comment about how maybe if I'd treated Melissa better, she wouldn't have moved on so quickly. That comment was completely inappropriate and showed that he was already viewing our professional relationship through the lens of his personal feelings about my past relationship with Melissa. From that conversation forward, Brad has made my work life increasingly difficult. He assigns me the most challenging clients and the least promising leads, then criticizes my performance when those accounts don't close quickly. He started scheduling important team meetings when he knows I have client calls, then acting like I'm not committed to the team when I can't attend. He reviews my work with a level of scrutiny that he doesn't apply to other team members, finding fault with things that would be overlooked for anyone else. The worst part is how he talks about me to other colleagues. He makes comments about my attitude problems and suggests that I'm not a team player. He's even hinted that my relationship with clients isn't as strong as it should be, despite the fact that several clients have specifically requested to work with me again. Other team members have started to notice the differential treatment. One coworker pulled me aside and said it was obvious that Brad had it out for me, but nobody wants to get involved in what seems like personal drama. They're all afraid that speaking up would make them targets of Brad's behaviour as well. I've tried to document everything, keeping records of assignments, feedback and interactions, but it's hard to prove that discrimination is happening when Brad is careful to frame everything in terms of performance concerns. He's smart enough not to mention Melissa directly or make obvious personal attacks during official meetings. The situation got worse last month when Brad started bringing Melissa to company social events. She would hang on his arm while he made conversation with colleagues, and I could see other people noticing the awkwardness of the situation. During one happy hour event, Melissa made a point of coming over to talk to me, asking how work was going and whether I was dating anyone new. It felt like she was either trying to show that there was no awkwardness, or maybe even trying to make Brad jealous by being friendly with me. Brad watched the entire interaction with obvious displeasure, and the next week he assigned me to a project that required extensive travel to our least desirable client locations. My sales performance has actually improved despite the hostile work environment, but I'm constantly stressed and looking for opportunities elsewhere. The irony is that Brad's behaviour is probably creating more problems for the company than any personal drama between him and me ever could have. Several team members have mentioned that the department atmosphere has become toxic, and one person has already transferred to a different division. I've considered reporting the situation to HR, but I'm worried that it will look like I'm just bitter about my ex-girlfriend dating my boss. The whole thing feels like a nightmare that I can't wake up from, and I never imagined that a simple breakup could create such professional complications. This situation is like a masterclass in how personal relationships can completely destroy workplace professionalism. Brad is clearly letting his insecurities about dating his employee's ex-girlfriend turn him into a petty tyrant who's sabotaging his own team. The fact that he's retaliating against someone for a relationship that ended before he was even in the picture shows serious maturity issues. This is exactly why most companies have policies against managers dating within their reporting structure. Our next story takes workplace incompetence to a whole new level that honestly defies belief. My new hire lied about having a computer science degree, and I didn't find out until she crashed our entire system. I'm the IT director at a regional insurance company, and we've been struggling to find qualified developers for months. When Vanessa applied for our junior developer position, her resume looked perfect. Computer science degree from a reputable state university, internship experience at a tech startup, and she interviewed really well. She could talk about programming concepts, understood our tech stack, and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the work. Vanessa started 3 months ago, and initially everything seemed fine. She was quiet but asked good questions, and her first few assignments were completed adequately. Nothing spectacular, but solid work that met our standards. I figured she just needed time to adjust to our systems and company culture. She seemed to work well independently and didn't require much hand-holding, which I appreciated since our team was already stretched thin. About 6 weeks into her employment, I started noticing some red flags. Vanessa would ask questions about basic programming concepts that any computer science graduate should know. When I assigned her to work on database optimization, she seemed confused about fundamental SQL operations. She also had trouble understanding our code review process and would get defensive when other developers pointed out issues with her work. The real problem started when I gave her a more complex project involving API integration. She spent 2 weeks working on it and kept saying she was making progress. But whenever I asked to see her work, she would say she was still debugging and wasn't ready to show anything yet. When she finally submitted the code, it was a complete mess. Basic syntax errors, logical inconsistencies, and security vulnerabilities that a first-year computer science student would catch. I pulled her aside for a private conversation about her performance and asked if she was having trouble adjusting to our development environment. That's when she broke down crying and admitted that she had never actually graduated from college. She had attended for 3 years, but dropped out due to financial difficulties and family problems. She said she'd been teaching herself programming through online courses and thought she could fake her way through the job until she learned enough to perform adequately. I was stunned. This woman had lied on her resume, in her interview, and during her background check. She had forged documents and created fake references to support her story. When I asked how she'd managed to pass our technical interview, she said she'd memorized common interview questions and practiced specific coding problems for weeks beforehand. The situation got worse when I realized the extent of damage her incompetent code had already caused. The API integration she'd been working on was connected to our main customer database, and her faulty implementation had been running in production for several days. It had corrupted data for hundreds of client accounts and created security vulnerabilities that exposed sensitive personal information. We had to spend the entire weekend with our full development team working to fix the database corruption and patch the security holes. The incident cost us thousands of dollars in overtime pay and consulting fees, not to mention the potential liability from the data exposure. We had to notify affected clients and report the breach to regulatory authorities. Vanessa was terminated immediately, of course, but the damage was already done. We've had to implement additional code review processes and testing protocols to prevent something like this from happening again. The whole experience has made me much more skeptical during the hiring process, and we now require candidates to complete practical coding exercises during interviews rather than just discussing theoretical concepts. The most frustrating part is that Vanessa actually wasn't a terrible programmer for someone who was self-taught. If she had been honest about her background and applied for an entry-level position or internship, we might have been willing to train her properly. Instead, her deception put our entire system at risk and damaged our team's trust in new hires. I've heard through industry contacts that Vanessa has applied to other tech companies using the same false credentials. I've been debating whether to warn other employers, but our legal department says I should only confirm employment dates and job titles if anyone calls for a reference. That story shows exactly why background checks exist and why lying on your resume is such a dangerous gamble. She might have had potential as a self-taught programmer, but instead of being honest and working her way up, she created a disaster that could have destroyed the company's reputation. The fact that she's apparently still using fake credentials at other companies is terrifying for the entire industry. Let's dive into another workplace situation that involves some seriously questionable decision-making from upper management. My company hired a consultant to fix our productivity issues, and he recommended we remove all the chairs from the office. I work at a marketing agency with about 40 employees, and we've been struggling with some workflow problems lately. Projects were taking longer than expected, client communications were getting delayed, and there was a general sense that people weren't as focused as they could be. Our CEO decided we needed outside help to identify the issues and implement solutions. Enter Mitchell, a workplace efficiency consultant who charged $300 an hour and claimed to have revolutionized productivity at dozens of companies. He spent 2 weeks observing our office, conducting interviews with employees, and analyzing our processes. His findings were presented in a 40-page report that cost us $12,000. According to Mitchell's analysis, the primary cause of our productivity problems was that employees were too comfortable at their workstations. He argued that sitting for long periods made people lazy and complacent, leading to decreased focus and motivation. His solution was radical: remove all chairs from the office and require everyone to work standing up. Mitchell claimed that standing workstations would increase energy levels, improve collaboration through more frequent movement, and create a sense of urgency that would naturally boost productivity. He cited studies about the health benefits of standing desks and provided examples of other companies that had supposedly seen dramatic improvements after implementing similar policies. Our CEO was completely sold on the idea. He loved anything that seemed innovative and cutting edge, and the concept of a chairless office appealed to his desire to be seen as a forward-thinking leader. Despite concerns from several department heads, he approved the plan and gave Mitchell another $10,000 to oversee the transition. The implementation was a disaster from day one. Employees who were used to sitting for 8 hours suddenly had to stand at their desks all day. People started experiencing back pain, leg cramps, and general fatigue within hours. Productivity didn't increase. It plummeted as everyone became focused on their physical discomfort rather than their work. The graphic designers were particularly affected since their work requires precise mouse movements and detailed attention to visual elements. Standing for hours while trying to do intricate design work was nearly impossible, and the quality of their output suffered significantly. Several clients complained about deliverables that didn't meet their usual standards. Mitchell insisted that the adjustment period was normal and that employees would adapt within a few weeks. He recommended that anyone having trouble should take more frequent breaks to stretch and move around, which obviously defeated the purpose of increasing productivity. He also suggested that people who couldn't handle standing all day might not be the right fit for a dynamic, modern workplace. After 2 weeks of declining productivity and increasing employee complaints, people started bringing their own chairs from home. Mitchell was furious and convinced our CEO to implement a no-chair policy with disciplinary consequences. Anyone caught sitting would receive a formal warning, and repeat offences could lead to termination. The situation reached a breaking point when one of our senior account managers, who was 6 months pregnant, nearly fainted during a client presentation. She'd been standing for 4 hours straight while preparing materials and conducting the meeting, and her doctor later said that extended standing could be dangerous for her pregnancy. 3 other employees quit that week, citing the hostile work environment and unreasonable working conditions. One person filed a complaint with the state Labour Department about workplace safety violations. Another threatened to sue for discrimination, arguing that the no-chair policy was particularly harmful to employees with disabilities or medical conditions. Our CEO finally came to his senses when our biggest client threatened to terminate their contract after a series of subpar deliverables and missed deadlines. The chairless office experiment had lasted exactly 1 month and cost us nearly $30,000 in consulting fees, plus the productivity losses and employee turnover. Mitchell's final report blamed the failure on poor employee attitudes and insufficient leadership commitment to change. He suggested that the company culture wasn't ready for such an innovative approach and recommended a gradual transition over 6 months instead of the immediate implementation. He offered to help manage this longer process for an additional $25,000. Needless to say, we declined his generous offer and bought new chairs for everyone within a week. Our productivity returned to normal levels almost immediately, and we managed to retain most of our remaining staff by giving everyone a modest bonus as an apology for the ridiculous experiment. The whole experience taught me that some consultants will say anything to justify their fees, and that CEOs who chase every management fad without considering practical implications can destroy their companies. We still joke about the great chair crisis whenever someone complains about minor workplace issues. The mental image of an entire office full of people standing at their desks while trying to work is absolutely absurd. This consultant basically convinced them to turn their workplace into a torture chamber and then charged them thousands of dollars for the privilege. The fact that he blamed the employees when his ridiculous plan failed shows exactly what kind of person preys on desperate business owners with more money than sense. Here's our next story about a workplace situation that escalated way beyond what anyone could have predicted. I reported my co-worker for constantly microwaving fish in the break room, and it destroyed our entire department. This might sound like a petty complaint, but the situation spiraled completely out of control and ended up affecting everyone in our office. I work in the accounting department of a mid-sized manufacturing company, and we have a small break room with a microwave, refrigerator, and a few tables where people eat lunch. About 4 months ago, my co-worker Christine started bringing elaborate seafood lunches every single day. We're talking salmon fillets, whole fish, shrimp scampi, crab cakes, and other dishes that created incredibly strong odours when reheated. The smell would fill not just the break room, but our entire floor of the building, and it would linger for hours. At first, people just made jokes about it or ate their lunch outside when the smell got too overwhelming. But Christine seemed completely oblivious to the fact that her food choices were affecting everyone else. She would microwave her fish dishes for extended periods, sometimes heating the same meal multiple times if it wasn't warm enough. The smell was particularly problematic for several reasons. Our office has poor ventilation, so odours tend to stick around much longer than they should. We also have 2 employees with severe food allergies who started having reactions to the airborne particles from Christine's reheated seafood. Additionally, we frequently have clients visit our department, and the fish smell was creating an unprofessional atmosphere. After about 6 weeks of this, I decided to approach Christine directly. I explained politely that her lunch choices were creating strong odours that were bothering other people, and asked if she could maybe save the fish dishes for dinners at home. Christine's response was immediate and hostile. She said she had every right to eat whatever she wanted, and that other people's sensitivities weren't her problem. She also made some comment about how she was tired of accommodating other people's preferences, and that if the smell bothered people so much, they could eat somewhere else. When I mentioned that clients had commented on the odour, she said that was a building maintenance issue, not her responsibility. I tried a different approach and suggested that maybe she could use the microwave in the kitchen on a different floor, which had better ventilation. Christine accused me of trying to segregate her and said I was being discriminatory. She claimed that asking her to use a different microwave was essentially banishing her from the break room and creating a hostile work environment. After another month of daily fish microwaving, I finally decided to report the situation to our office manager. I explained that the odour was affecting productivity, potentially causing health issues for employees with allergies, and creating an unprofessional environment when clients visited. I emphasised that I had tried to resolve the situation directly with Christine, but that she had been uncooperative. Our office manager, who was already dealing with several other interpersonal conflicts in different departments, decided to implement a new policy regarding microwave use. The policy stated that employees should be considerate of others when heating foods with strong odours and should avoid items that could trigger allergic reactions or create lasting smells. Christine was furious about the new policy and was convinced that I had gotten her in trouble for no valid reason. She started a campaign to rally other employees to her cause, arguing that the company was trying to control what people could eat, and that this was a slippery slope toward more invasive workplace restrictions. To my surprise, Christine actually found some supporters. Several employees felt that the microwave policy was too vague and could be used to restrict any food that someone found objectionable. Others thought that workplace rules shouldn't extend to personal lunch choices as long as people weren't violating health codes. The situation escalated when Christine filed a formal complaint with HR, claiming that I had been harassing her about her cultural food choices and that the new microwave policy was discriminatory. She argued that her seafood lunches were part of her Mediterranean heritage and that restricting them constituted cultural insensitivity. HR launched an investigation that involved interviewing everyone in our department about the microwave situation, the new policy, and the interpersonal dynamics between Christine and me. The investigation dragged on for 3 weeks, and created an incredibly tense atmosphere where people felt like they had to choose sides. During this time, Christine continued microwaving fish every day, seemingly to prove a point about her rights as an employee. The smell got worse, if anything, and she started bringing even more pungent seafood dishes. 2 clients actually asked to move their meetings to conference rooms on different floors because of the odour. The final blow came when one of our co-workers, with severe shellfish allergies, had to be taken to the emergency room after Christine microwaved a particularly aromatic crab dish. The employee had an allergic reaction that required medical treatment, and their doctor said the reaction was likely triggered by airborne particles from the reheated seafood. HR concluded their investigation by determining that while Christine had the right to eat whatever food she chose, she also had a responsibility to consider the health and safety of her co-workers. They implemented a stricter policy about foods that could trigger allergic reactions and required Christine to use the microwave in the basement kitchen when heating seafood. Christine was outraged by this decision and quit her job the following week, claiming that the company had created a discriminatory environment that made it impossible for her to work comfortably. She also threatened to file a lawsuit for workplace discrimination and cultural insensitivity. The whole ordeal lasted almost 4 months and created lasting divisions in our department. Some people still think I was wrong to report Christine and that the situation could have been handled more diplomatically. Others believe that Christine was being deliberately inconsiderate and that stronger action should have been taken sooner. Our department productivity suffered during the investigation, and the constant tension affected everyone's morale. We also lost a valuable employee, regardless of her poor judgment about microwaving fish, because Christine was actually quite good at her job when she wasn't creating olfactory disasters in the break room. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just dealt with the smell and found ways to work around it, but I also think that basic workplace courtesy shouldn't be too much to ask. The whole situation taught me that even seemingly minor workplace conflicts can spiral into major departmental crises if people aren't willing to compromise. This story perfectly captures how workplace conflicts can escalate from zero to absolutely insane in record time. Christine turned a simple request about not stinking up the office into a full-blown discrimination lawsuit, complete with emergency room visits and HR investigations. The fact that she doubled down and started bringing even smellier fish after people complained shows this was never about cultural heritage and everything about being stubborn. Let's move into another workplace nightmare that shows how badly things can go wrong when companies don't properly vet their employees. My company hired someone who turned out to be a convicted felon and didn't tell us until after he assaulted a co-worker. I work in HR at a manufacturing plant with about 200 employees, and we've always prided ourselves on having thorough background check procedures. At least, I thought we did until this incident completely shattered my faith in our hiring process. About 5 months ago, we were desperately trying to fill several positions on our production floor. We'd had 3 people quit within 2 weeks, and the remaining staff was working overtime to keep up with orders. When Derek applied for a machine operator position, he seemed like exactly what we needed. He had relevant experience, interviewed well, and was available to start immediately. Our standard background check process involves verifying employment history, checking references, and running a basic criminal background screen. Derek passed all of these checks without any red flags. His previous employers gave positive references, and the background check came back clean. He started work the following Monday and initially seemed like a model employee. Derek was punctual, worked well with others, and picked up our procedures quickly. His supervisor was impressed with his work ethic and technical skills. For the first 3 months, everything seemed perfect. He even volunteered for overtime shifts when we were behind on orders and helped train newer employees. The problems started in month 4, when Derek began having conflicts with other workers. He would get visibly angry when machines malfunctioned or when supervisors gave him feedback about his work. Several co-workers mentioned that he had an explosive temper and would mutter threats under his breath when he thought no one was listening. His supervisor tried to address the attitude issues through coaching and documented conversations, but Derek's behavior continued to escalate. He started showing up late, taking extended breaks, and arguing with anyone who tried to correct his work. The final incident happened during a particularly busy shift, when production quotas were high and everyone was stressed. Derek was having trouble with his machine and called for maintenance support. When the maintenance technician, Carlos, arrived to help, Derek became increasingly agitated because the repair was taking longer than expected. He started yelling at Carlos, blaming him for the production delays and using increasingly hostile language. Carlos, who had been with the company for 8 years and was well respected by everyone, tried to calm Derek down and explain that the machine had a complex electrical issue that couldn't be rushed. Derek's response was to shove Carlos against the machine and threaten to beat him up if he didn't fix the problem immediately. Other workers intervened before the situation could escalate further, but Carlos had to be taken to the emergency room for a back injury from being slammed against the machine. Derek was immediately suspended pending investigation, and we called the police to report the workplace assault. That's when we discovered the truth about Derek's background. During the police investigation, it came out that Derek had been convicted of aggravated assault 3 years earlier and had served 18 months in prison. He had also been arrested twice for domestic violence. Though those charges had been dropped when the victims refused to testify, we were completely baffled about how these convictions hadn't shown up in our background check. After investigating with our screening company, we discovered that Derek had been using a slightly different version of his name and had provided a false social security number on his application. The background check had been run on someone with a similar name who had no criminal record. Derek had also provided fake references from previous employers. When we called the numbers he'd given, we were actually talking to his friends who pretended to be supervisors and gave glowing recommendations. The addresses he'd provided for previous jobs were real companies, but he'd never actually worked at any of them. The whole situation was a nightmare from a legal and insurance perspective. Carlos ended up needing surgery for his back injury and was out of work for 3 months. He filed a workers' compensation claim and also sued the company for negligent hiring, arguing that we should have caught Derek's criminal history before putting other employees at risk. Our insurance company launched their own investigation into our hiring practices and found several gaps in our background check procedures. We had to completely overhaul our screening process, which now includes fingerprint-based criminal checks, in-person verification of references, and more thorough documentation requirements. The incident also created a climate of fear among our production workers. People were nervous about working with new hires and questioned whether they could trust management to properly screen employees. Several long-term workers asked to transfer to different shifts to avoid working with new people they didn't know well. Derek was arrested and charged with assault and providing false information on employment applications. He eventually pleaded guilty and received 2 years in prison, but the damage to our workplace culture and Carlos's health was already done. Carlos never fully recovered from his back injury and had to take a desk job in our quality control department at reduced pay. The whole experience cost our company hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, insurance premiums, workers' compensation claims, and the costs of implementing new hiring procedures. We also lost several good employees who decided they didn't feel safe working in our environment anymore. Looking back, there were warning signs about Derek's temperament that we should have taken more seriously during his probationary period. But the bigger issue was that our background check system was so easy to game that a determined person could completely fabricate their identity and work history without much difficulty. That story is absolutely terrifying because it shows how easily someone can slip through the cracks of hiring systems that companies think are foolproof. The fact that Derek managed to fake his entire identity and work history while hiding a violent criminal past is a nightmare scenario for any workplace. Poor Carlos paid the price for their inadequate screening process, and now everyone has to live with the consequences of one person's deception. Here's another workplace story that demonstrates how quickly office dynamics can turn toxic when personal issues spill into professional settings. My coworker started a rumor that I was having an affair with our married boss, and it destroyed both of our careers. I work as a project coordinator at an engineering consulting firm, and I've been there for about 4 years. My boss, Richard, is a department head who's been with the company for over a decade. He's married with 2 kids and has always maintained a strictly professional relationship with everyone on our team. The problem started when we hired Lindsay as an administrative assistant about 8 months ago. She was in her early 20s, recently graduated from college, and seemed eager to prove herself in her first professional job. Initially, she was friendly and hardworking, and I tried to help her learn our systems and office culture. Lindsay quickly developed what seemed like a crush on Richard. She would find excuses to visit his office multiple times a day, volunteer for any project he was involved with, and dress more formally on days when she knew he'd be in meetings. Richard, to his credit, kept all interactions with her strictly professional and never encouraged her behaviour. About 3 months into Lindsay's employment, Richard and I were assigned to work on a major project that required extensive collaboration. We had to travel together to client sites, attend evening meetings, and spend long hours reviewing technical documents and proposals. Our work relationship had always been collaborative and friendly, but this project required even closer coordination. The project was successful, and Richard made a point of crediting my contributions during the presentation to company leadership. He also recommended me for a promotion and salary increase based on the quality of my work. I was thrilled about the recognition and the career advancement opportunity. Lindsay's attitude toward me changed dramatically after Richard's recommendation became public. She started making snide comments about favoritism and suggesting that my promotion was based on factors other than work performance. She would make jokes about people who sleep their way to the top when she thought I couldn't hear, and she started treating me with obvious hostility. The situation escalated when Lindsay began spreading rumours that Richard and I were having an affair. She told other employees that she'd seen us having intimate conversations in his office, that we took suspiciously long lunch breaks together, and that our business travel involved more than just work activities. She claimed she had evidence of inappropriate text messages and personal gifts. None of these allegations were true, but Lindsay was convincing enough that some people started believing her stories. The rumours spread quickly through our office, and I began noticing strange looks and whispered conversations that would stop when I entered a room. Several co-workers started treating me differently, either with judgment or awkward sympathy. The situation became unbearable when Lindsay escalated her campaign by reporting her suspicions to HR. She filed a formal complaint alleging that Richard was showing favouritism toward me due to a personal relationship, and that this was creating a hostile work environment for other employees. She claimed that our affair was an open secret that everyone knew about but was afraid to report. HR launched an investigation that was humiliating and invasive. They interviewed dozens of employees about their observations of Richard's and my interactions. They reviewed our email communications, examined our travel expense reports, and even questioned us separately about our personal lives and relationship status. During my interview, I was asked directly whether I was having an affair with Richard and had to provide details about every interaction we'd had outside of normal business hours. The investigators wanted to know about every business dinner, every late meeting, and every moment we'd spent together without other people present. Richard was subjected to the same scrutiny, and the stress was clearly affecting him. He started avoiding any one-on-one interactions with me, even when they were necessary for work projects. He seemed constantly worried about how his actions might be perceived, and began including other people in meetings that would normally just involve the two of us. The investigation dragged on for 6 weeks, during which time the entire office atmosphere became toxic. People were taking sides, speculating about the truth of Lindsay's allegations, and treating both Richard and me like we were walking scandals. Some employees seemed to enjoy the drama, while others were clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. When HR finally concluded their investigation, they found no evidence to support Lindsay's allegations. They determined that Richard and I had maintained a professional relationship and that any favoritism was based on work performance rather than personal factors. However, the damage to both of our reputations was already done. Richard's wife had learned about the investigation and the rumours, and even though she believed his denials, the situation put tremendous strain on their marriage. She started showing up at the office unexpectedly and insisted on attending company social events where she'd never come before. Richard looked miserable and stressed all the time. My own reputation was permanently damaged by the months of gossip and speculation. Even though I was officially cleared of any wrongdoing, some people continued to believe that something inappropriate had happened. I noticed that I was excluded from certain meetings and social events, and some colleagues treated me with lingering suspicion. The worst part was that Lindsay faced no real consequences for her false allegations. HR determined that she had acted in good faith by reporting her concerns and that disciplining her might discourage other employees from coming forward with legitimate complaints. She received counselling about appropriate workplace behaviour, but kept her job and faced no formal punishment. Richard ended up requesting a transfer to a different department to escape the ongoing gossip and speculation. He took a lateral position that was essentially a demotion in terms of responsibility and influence. His marriage survived, but colleagues said he was never the same confident leader he'd been before the investigation. I left the company 6 months later when it became clear that the rumours and suspicions weren't going away. Even though I'd been cleared by HR, the stigma followed me through every interaction and made it impossible to advance my career there. I had to start over at a new company where nobody knew about the false allegations. Lindsay still works there and has been promoted twice since the investigation ended. She acts like nothing happened and occasionally makes comments about how unfortunate it was that Richard and I let personal issues affect our professional lives. The hypocrisy is breathtaking, but she's managed to rewrite history in a way that makes her look like an innocent bystander. The whole experience taught me how easily workplace reputations can be destroyed by malicious rumours and how difficult it is to prove a negative. Even when investigations clear you of wrongdoing, the suspicion and gossip can follow you for years and affect every aspect of your professional life. This story shows how destructive workplace gossip can be when it's fueled by jealousy and spite. Lindsay basically weaponized false allegations to destroy 2 people's careers because she couldn't handle being rejected, and the system protected her while punishing the victims. The fact that she faced 0 consequences, while Richard and the narrator had to rebuild their entire professional lives elsewhere, is absolutely infuriating. Let's move into another workplace situation that shows what happens when companies prioritize image over employee safety. My workplace made us continue working during a gas leak because they didn't want to lose money on a big presentation. I work at a corporate training centre that hosts seminars and conferences for various companies. We have a large building with multiple meeting rooms, a cafeteria, and administrative offices. Last month we had one of the most dangerous situations I've ever experienced at work, and our management's response was absolutely shocking. It was a Tuesday morning, and we were preparing to host a 3-day leadership conference for a major pharmaceutical company. This was a huge contract worth over $50,000, and our management had been planning this event for months. About 200 executives were expected to attend, and everything had to be perfect. Around 9 in the morning, several employees started noticing a strange smell in the building. It was a sharp, chemical odour that seemed strongest near the kitchen and cafeteria areas. The maintenance staff was called to investigate, and they quickly determined that there was a natural gas leak somewhere in the building's infrastructure. The leak appeared to be coming from underground pipes that supplied gas to our kitchen equipment and heating systems. The maintenance supervisor said the concentration was significant enough that it could pose a safety risk, especially if it continued to build up in enclosed spaces. He recommended evacuating the building immediately and calling the gas company to perform emergency repairs. Our general manager, Patricia, was informed about the situation, and her response was shocking. She said that evacuating the building was absolutely not an option because the pharmaceutical company's executives would start arriving in 2 hours. She argued that the gas leak was probably minor and that opening windows and turning on fans would be sufficient to address any safety concerns. The maintenance supervisor tried to explain that gas leaks are unpredictable and that even small leaks can become dangerous quickly. He showed Patricia readings from his gas detection equipment that indicated potentially hazardous levels in certain areas of the building. She dismissed his concerns and said that he was being overly cautious about a routine maintenance issue. Patricia's solution was to have maintenance staff use industrial fans to blow air through the building and to open all exterior doors and windows. She also instructed us to avoid using any electrical equipment that might create sparks and to refrain from smoking anywhere on the property. She seemed to think these measures would make it safe to proceed with the conference. The pharmaceutical company's advance team arrived around 11 to set up their presentation materials and check the meeting rooms. Several of them immediately commented on the strong chemical smell and asked if there were any safety concerns. Patricia assured them that we were just dealing with a minor ventilation issue that would be resolved shortly. As the morning progressed, the smell got stronger rather than weaker, despite all the fans and open windows. Several employees started experiencing headaches and nausea, which are common symptoms of gas exposure. 2 people asked to go home sick, but Patricia refused, saying we needed all hands available for such an important event. The situation became critical around noon when one of our catering staff members collapsed in the kitchen area where the gas smell was strongest. She had to be taken to the emergency room by ambulance, and the paramedics who responded said the gas concentration in that area was dangerously high. They strongly recommended evacuating the entire building. Patricia's response was to close off the kitchen and cafeteria areas and move all food service operations to a catering truck outside. She insisted that the conference could still proceed safely in the meeting rooms, which she claimed had better ventilation. She also instructed all staff members not to discuss the gas leak with conference attendees to avoid creating unnecessary panic. By 1 o'clock, when the pharmaceutical executives began arriving for the opening session, the smell was still noticeable throughout the building. Several attendees asked about it, and Patricia told them we were having minor HVAC issues that wouldn't affect the conference proceedings. She had staff members stationed at entrances with air fresheners to try to mask the odour. The opening presentation went ahead as scheduled, but during the first hour, 3 more people became ill with symptoms consistent with gas exposure. 2 were our employees and 1 was a conference attendee who had to step outside for fresh air multiple times during the presentation. The pharmaceutical company's event coordinator started asking serious questions about building safety. Finally, around 3 o'clock, a city inspector arrived after being called by someone who was concerned about the situation. The inspector took gas readings throughout the building and immediately ordered a complete evacuation. He said the concentration levels were well above safe limits and that continuing to occupy the building was extremely dangerous. The evacuation was chaotic and embarrassing. 200 pharmaceutical executives had to be rushed out of the building in the middle of presentations, leaving behind materials and personal belongings. Several people required medical attention for gas exposure symptoms, and the fire department had to ventilate the entire building before it could be declared safe. The pharmaceutical company immediately cancelled the remainder of their conference and demanded a full refund of their contract payment. They also threatened to sue our company for endangering their employees and creating a hostile event environment. Their legal team later filed complaints with multiple regulatory agencies about our safety violations. The gas company's repair crew arrived that evening and found that the leak was far more serious than our maintenance staff had initially assessed. A major underground pipe had developed multiple rupture points that could have led to an explosion under the right conditions. The repairs took 3 days and cost over $20,000. Our company faced investigations from OSHA, the fire department, and the State Occupational Safety Agency. We were fined heavily for knowingly exposing employees and visitors to hazardous conditions and for failing to follow proper emergency procedures. The total penalties exceeded $40,000, nearly as much as the contract we tried to save. 3 employees quit immediately after the incident, saying they couldn't work for a company that would prioritize money over their safety. Several others filed workers' compensation claims for medical expenses related to gas exposure. The employee who collapsed in the kitchen was hospitalized for 2 days and is still dealing with respiratory issues. Patricia was eventually fired, but not until after all the investigations were complete and the company had been publicly embarrassed by news coverage of the incident. Her replacement implemented new safety protocols and emergency procedures, but the damage to our company's reputation was already done. We lost several major contracts when words spread about our poor safety practices, and our insurance premiums increased dramatically due to the liability claims. The total cost of Patricia's decision to keep the building open was probably over $200,000, far more than the original conference contract was worth. The whole experience was traumatic for everyone involved and showed me how quickly workplace situations can become life-threatening when management makes poor decisions under pressure. I still think about what could have happened if that gas leak had ignited while 200 people were trapped inside the building. This story is absolutely horrifying and shows corporate greed at its most dangerous level. Patricia was literally willing to risk explosion and death to avoid losing a $50,000 contract, then ended up costing the company 4 times that amount, plus their reputation. The fact that people were collapsing from gas exposure and she still refused to evacuate shows a level of negligence that borders on criminal behaviour. That's exactly the kind of corporate negligence that should result in criminal charges, not just fines. When you're willing to risk lives for a conference contract, you've crossed the line from bad management into potential manslaughter territory. The fact that multiple people had to be hospitalized because Patricia couldn't bear the thought of losing money is absolutely sickening. Let's move on to another workplace story that shows how personal vendettas can completely poison professional environments. My co-worker sabotaged my presentation to steal my promotion, and I only found out because she accidentally sent me her plan. I work in business development at a software company, and I've been there for about 3 years. 6 months ago, our department head announced that there would be a new senior analyst position opening up, and several of us were encouraged to apply. The role came with a significant salary increase and would put whoever got it on track for management positions. I'd been working toward this kind of opportunity since I started at the company, taking on extra projects and consistently exceeding my targets. My colleague Brittany had also expressed interest in the position, and initially I thought the competition would be healthy and professional. We'd always gotten along well and had collaborated on several successful projects together. The promotion process involved submitting a detailed proposal for improving our client acquisition strategies, followed by a presentation to the executive team. I spent weeks researching industry trends, analysing our current processes, and developing what I thought was a comprehensive plan to increase our conversion rates by 30%. During the preparation period, Brittany and I would occasionally discuss our progress and bounce ideas off each other. I thought we were being collegial and supportive, sharing general concepts without revealing specific strategies. She seemed genuinely interested in my research methods and would ask detailed questions about my data sources and analytical approaches. 2 days before my scheduled presentation, I received an email that changed everything. It was from Brittany, but clearly wasn't meant for me. The subject line read, "Updated timeline for presentation sabotage," and the message was addressed to her friend who worked in a different department. The email laid out a detailed plan to undermine my presentation and make me look incompetent in front of the executives. She had been systematically gathering information about my proposal through our conversations, then developing counter-arguments and alternative data to discredit my recommendations during the Q&A session. But the sabotage went much deeper than just preparing rebuttals. Brittany had convinced someone in IT to give her access to the conference room's presentation system, and she was planning to introduce technical glitches during my slides. She also intended to have her friend ask planted questions that would highlight weaknesses she'd identified in my proposal. The most shocking part was that she'd been spreading rumours about my research methods to other departments, suggesting that my data was flawed and that I'd been cutting corners on analysis. She was trying to damage my reputation before I even gave the presentation, so that executives would be predisposed to doubt my conclusions. The email also revealed that Brittany had been copying elements of my proposal for her own presentation. She'd taken several of my key recommendations and reframed them as her original ideas, planning to present them before my scheduled slot so that I would look like I was plagiarizing her work. I was completely stunned by the level of deception and manipulation she'd been planning. This wasn't just competitive behavior, it was a calculated campaign to destroy my career prospects while advancing her own. I printed out the email immediately and started gathering additional evidence of her sabotage attempts. I debated whether to confront Brittany directly or take the information straight to management. Ultimately, I decided to report the situation to our department head and HR, since what she was planning could be considered workplace harassment and potentially even corporate espionage. The investigation was swift and thorough. When confronted with the email evidence, Brittany initially tried to claim it was a joke, or that her words had been taken out of context. But when IT reviewed the access logs for the conference room systems, they found that she had indeed been attempting to gain unauthorized access to the presentation equipment. HR also interviewed the friend mentioned in the email, who confirmed that Brittany had asked her to attend my presentation and ask specific questions designed to make me look unprepared. Several other employees came forward with information about the rumours Brittany had been spreading regarding my work quality and research methods. The disciplinary action was immediate and severe. Brittany was terminated for attempting to sabotage a colleague's work and for unauthorised access to company systems. Her presentation was cancelled and she was escorted from the building that same day. The promotion process was postponed for 2 weeks while management reviewed the integrity of all submissions. When I finally gave my presentation, it went extremely well. The executives were impressed with my research and recommendations, and I was offered the promotion the following week. However, the whole experience left me feeling paranoid about trusting colleagues and wondering who else might be plotting against me behind my back. The most disturbing aspect was realizing how long Brittany had been planning this campaign while maintaining a friendly facade. She'd been asking me questions about my work not out of genuine interest, but to identify vulnerabilities she could exploit. Every conversation we'd had during the preparation period had been a reconnaissance mission. Several co-workers expressed shock when they learned about Brittany's behaviour, saying they never would have suspected her of such underhanded tactics. But a few people mentioned that they'd noticed her becoming increasingly competitive and secretive over the past few months, which now made more sense in context. The incident led to new policies about information security and presentation protocols. The company also implemented additional training on professional conduct and ethical behaviour in competitive workplace situations. They wanted to make sure that future promotion processes wouldn't be vulnerable to this kind of sabotage. I got the promotion and have been successful in the role, but I learned to be much more guarded about sharing work details with colleagues until projects are completely finished. The experience taught me that workplace competition can bring out the worst in people, and that not everyone who seems supportive actually has your best interests at heart. The fact that she accidentally sent you her entire evil plan is like something out of a workplace thriller movie. Brittany spent months building an elaborate sabotage campaign, complete with IT infiltration, and planted audience members, only to destroy herself with one misdirected email. Sometimes karma works in mysterious and incredibly satisfying ways. Here's another story about workplace drama that escalated far beyond anyone's expectations. My manager fired me for refusing to work on my wedding day, then called me at the altar, asking me to come in because they were short-staffed. I've been working as a server at a popular chain restaurant for about 2 years, and despite the typical restaurant industry chaos, I generally enjoyed my job. The pay was decent with tips, my co-workers were fun, and the management seemed reasonable most of the time. My manager Troy had always been demanding but fair, and I'd never had any serious conflicts with him before. When I got engaged last year, I was excited to share the news with my work family, and everyone seemed genuinely happy for me. I started planning my wedding for a Saturday in October, giving myself plenty of time to request the day off and make arrangements. I submitted my time off request 6 months in advance, which was well beyond our required notice period. Troy approved it without any issues, and even joked about how he hoped I'd invite him to the reception. I thought everything was settled and continued with my wedding planning, booking vendors and sending invitations with confidence that my work schedule was handled. 3 weeks before my wedding, Troy approached me during a shift and said there was a problem with my time off request. Apparently, 2 other servers had also requested that Saturday off for different reasons, and he was concerned about being short-staffed during what was typically our busiest night of the week. I reminded Troy that my request had been approved months ago and that I'd given more notice than anyone else. I explained that all of my wedding vendors were booked, guests had made travel arrangements, and it was impossible to change the date at this point. I suggested that he could call in part-time staff or offer incentives for other servers to pick up extra shifts. Troy's response was that my wedding wasn't the restaurant's problem and that I needed to be more flexible as a team player. He said that personal events shouldn't take priority over business needs, and that if I wasn't willing to work when needed, maybe I wasn't the right fit for the job. I was shocked by his attitude change and reminded him that he'd already approved the request. I also pointed out that I'd never called in sick, had always picked up extra shifts when asked, and had been a reliable employee for 2 years. I thought my track record would count for something when it came to one of the most important days of my life. The situation escalated when Troy gave me an ultimatum: work my scheduled shift on Saturday or find a new job. He said he was tired of employees who thought their personal lives were more important than their responsibilities to the restaurant. He also made some comment about how people got married all the time, and it wasn't that big of a deal. I couldn't believe he was seriously asking me to choose between my job and my wedding day. I tried to reason with him one more time, offering to work double shifts the week before and after my wedding to make up for any inconvenience. I even offered to help train temporary staff or assist with preparations during my days off. Troy was unmoved by my offers and said his decision was final. Either I showed up for my Saturday shift, or I could consider myself terminated. He seemed to think I would cave under pressure and sacrifice my wedding to keep my job, but he was completely wrong about that. I told Troy that I would not be working on my wedding day under any circumstances, and that if he wanted to fire me for taking approved time off for my wedding, that was his choice. I also mentioned that I'd be speaking with higher management about his decision to revoke previously approved vacation time. Troy fired me on the spot, saying I was being insubordinate and that my attitude proved I wasn't committed to the job. He had me turn in my uniform and apron immediately and told security to escort me out of the building. I was humiliated and angry, but also relieved that I wouldn't have to deal with his unreasonable demands anymore. I called the district manager the next day to report what had happened, and she was appalled by Troy's behaviour. She said that revoking approved vacation time, especially for a wedding, was against company policy and potentially illegal. She promised to investigate the situation and offered to reinstate me immediately. My wedding day arrived, and it was absolutely perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, our families were happy, and I felt like the luckiest person in the world. We were taking photos after the ceremony when my phone started buzzing with calls from an unknown number. During a brief break between photos, I checked my voicemail and couldn't believe what I heard. It was Troy, calling from the restaurant in a complete panic. Apparently, both of the other servers who had requested time off had called in sick that morning, leaving him desperately short-staffed for the dinner rush. In the message, Troy was practically begging me to come in and help cover the shift. He said he knew it was my wedding day, but that he was in a crisis situation and really needed my help. He even offered to pay me double time and promised that we could work out our differences if I'd just come in for a few hours. I showed the voicemail to my new husband, and we both started laughing at the absolute audacity of the situation. Here was the man who had fired me 3 weeks earlier for refusing to work on my wedding day, now calling me at my wedding to ask me to come work because he was short-staffed. I didn't call him back, of course. I was busy celebrating the most important day of my life with the people I loved. But I did save the voicemail as evidence of his poor judgment and complete lack of professionalism. The next week, I met with the district manager and played her Troy's voicemail. She was mortified by his behaviour and said it showed incredibly poor judgment and a complete lack of respect for employees. She offered me my job back with a formal apology and a guarantee that Troy would receive additional management training. I decided not to return to the restaurant, having already found a better position at an upscale establishment with more professional management. But I did accept the district manager's offer to provide a positive reference, since she acknowledged that I'd been wrongfully terminated. Troy was eventually demoted to assistant manager and had to attend sensitivity training about work-life balance and employee relations. Several other servers told me that he'd been struggling to retain staff since my incident became known throughout the restaurant. Word had spread about his unreasonable demands and disrespectful treatment of employees. The whole experience taught me that some managers will try to bully employees into sacrificing their personal lives for work, but that standing up for yourself is usually worth it in the long run. I also learned to document everything when dealing with unreasonable supervisors, because their poor judgment often becomes evidence against them later. My new job has been wonderful, with management that actually respects employees' personal commitments and approved time-off requests. I sometimes wonder if Troy learned anything from the experience, but I'm just grateful that I didn't let him ruin one of the most important days of my life. The sheer nerve of calling someone at their wedding altar after firing them for not working their wedding is peak toxic management behaviour. Troy created his own staffing crisis through terrible decision-making, and then had the audacity to expect his victim to bail him out on the most important day of her life. At least he got demoted and had to face the consequences of his actions. Let's move into another workplace situation that shows how quickly professional relationships can turn into personal nightmares. My co-worker has been slowly poisoning my lunch for 3 months, and I only figured it out when I caught her on security camera. This is probably the most bizarre and terrifying workplace situation I've ever been in, and I'm still processing everything that happened. I work at a medium-sized accounting firm, and we have a communal refrigerator in our break room where everyone stores their lunches and snacks. For the past 3 months, I've been experiencing increasingly severe digestive issues that seem to coincide with eating lunch at work. I would feel fine in the morning, eat my usual homemade lunch around noon, and then spend the afternoon dealing with nausea, stomach cramps, and other unpleasant symptoms that made it difficult to concentrate on my work. At first, I thought I might be developing a food sensitivity, or that stress from busy season was affecting my digestion. I tried changing my diet, eliminating different ingredients, and even started bringing simpler meals like plain rice and grilled chicken. Nothing seemed to help, and the symptoms were getting worse rather than better. I went to my doctor several times, and she ran various tests for food allergies, digestive disorders, and other medical conditions. Everything came back normal, which was frustrating because I was clearly experiencing real physical symptoms that were affecting my quality of life and work performance. The breakthrough came when I started keeping a detailed food diary and realised that I only experienced symptoms on days when I ate lunch at the office. On weekends and days when I ate out for lunch, I felt completely fine. This made me suspect that something in our office environment was causing the problem. I began paying closer attention to my lunch routine and noticed that my food containers sometimes seemed slightly different when I retrieved them from the refrigerator. The lids might be positioned differently, or the food might look like it had been disturbed, but I couldn't be sure if I was imagining things or if someone was actually tampering with my meals. My suspicions focused on my co-worker Angela, who had been increasingly hostile toward me over the past few months. We'd had some professional disagreements about client handling, and she seemed to resent the fact that I'd been getting positive feedback from supervisors while she'd been struggling with her performance reviews. Angela would make passive-aggressive comments about my work, exclude me from conversations, and generally create an uncomfortable atmosphere whenever we interacted. I thought she was just being petty and unprofessional, but I never imagined she would escalate to physical harm. I decided to test my theory by setting up a hidden camera in the break room. I used a small device designed for home security and positioned it so it would capture anyone accessing the refrigerator. I told myself I was probably being paranoid, but I needed to know if someone was actually tampering with my food. The camera footage from the first day showed nothing unusual, just normal office workers getting their lunches and snacks. But on the second day, I captured something that made my blood run cold. Angela was clearly visible, opening my lunch container, adding something from a small bottle, and carefully stirring it into my food before replacing the lid. I watched the footage several times to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting what I was seeing. There was no doubt that Angela was deliberately adding some kind of substance to my lunch. The bottle she was using was small and dark, and she was being very careful to make sure no one else was around when she did it. I immediately took the footage to my supervisor and HR, but I also called the police because tampering with someone's food is a serious crime that could have resulted in severe health consequences or even death. I had no idea what substance she'd been adding to my meals for months. The police investigation moved quickly once they saw the video evidence. They obtained a search warrant for Angela's desk and car, where they found the bottle she'd been using. It turned out to be a liquid laxative that she'd been adding to my food in increasing doses over time, which explained why my symptoms had been getting progressively worse. Angela was arrested at work the next day and charged with assault and food tampering. During questioning, she admitted that she'd been poisoning my lunch because she was angry about my work performance and wanted to make me sick enough that I'd have to take time off or quit my job. She seemed to think that causing me digestive problems would hurt my productivity and reputation with management, giving her an advantage in our professional competition. She had no remorse about potentially causing serious health consequences, and actually seemed proud of how clever she thought her plan was. The medical implications were terrifying when I fully understood what had been happening. The doctor who reviewed my case said that prolonged exposure to increasing doses of laxatives could have caused severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and potentially permanent damage to my digestive system. Angela's actions could have resulted in hospitalization or even death if she'd miscalculated the dosages, or if I'd had underlying health conditions that made me more vulnerable to the substances she was using. The fact that she'd been escalating the amounts over time showed that she was willing to cause increasingly serious harm. The legal consequences were severe. Angela was convicted of assault with intent to cause bodily harm and sentenced to 2 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay my medical expenses and lost wages, though the financial compensation doesn't really address the psychological trauma of knowing someone was slowly poisoning me for months. The company fired Angela immediately and implemented new security measures in the break room, including better surveillance and policies about food storage. They also provided counselling services for employees who were traumatised by the incident, since everyone was shaken by the realisation that such a thing could happen in our workplace. I still struggle with anxiety about eating food that's been out of my sight, and I've had to work with a therapist to process the violation of trust and safety that Angela's actions represented. It's disturbing to realise that someone I worked with every day was capable of such calculated cruelty. The other employees were horrified when they learned what had been happening, and several people mentioned that they'd noticed Angela's increasing hostility, but never imagined it would lead to criminal behaviour. The incident changed the entire office culture and made everyone more aware of how workplace conflicts can escalate into dangerous situations. This story is absolutely chilling because it shows how workplace rivalry can escalate into attempted murder. Angela was literally poisoning someone over performance reviews and professional jealousy, which is beyond psychopathic behaviour. The fact that she was proud of her plan when caught shows she had zero understanding of how close she came to killing someone. This next story comes from someone who discovered their co-worker had some very interesting ideas about workplace hierarchy. My co-worker thinks she's my supervisor because she's been here longer. I work at a mid-sized accounting firm where I've been employed for about 8 months now. The job is pretty straightforward. I handle client files, process paperwork, and assist with tax preparation during busy season. When I started, I was told I'd be working alongside another associate named Patricia, who had been with the company for 3 years. At first, Patricia seemed helpful and knowledgeable. She showed me where supplies were kept, explained some of the office procedures, and answered questions when I was learning the ropes. I appreciated her guidance during those first few weeks, when everything felt overwhelming and new. But about 2 months into my employment, Patricia's behaviour started changing. She began making comments about my work methods, suggesting I was doing things incorrectly, even when I was following the exact procedures outlined in our training manual. When I mentioned this to our actual supervisor, he confirmed I was doing everything correctly and told me to keep up the good work. Patricia didn't like this response. She started positioning herself as some kind of quality control manager, reviewing my completed work and pointing out minor formatting differences that had no impact on accuracy or compliance. She'd leave sticky notes on my desk with suggestions for improvement that were really just her personal preferences rather than company standards. The situation escalated when Patricia began scheduling what she called one-on-one meetings with me. She'd book conference rooms and present printed agendas discussing my performance, areas for development, and goals for the upcoming quarter. During these meetings, she'd take notes and speak in the same tone our actual supervisors used during real performance reviews. I tried to handle this diplomatically at first. I explained that while I valued her input as a colleague, she wasn't in a supervisory role, and I felt uncomfortable with the formal review process she was implementing. Patricia responded by saying that her seniority and experience naturally put her in a mentoring position, and that I should be grateful for her investment in my professional development. Things got worse when Patricia started assigning me tasks that weren't part of my job description. She'd hand me lists of additional responsibilities she thought I should take on, including organising office supply orders, coordinating maintenance requests, and even planning the monthly birthday celebrations for our department. When I declined these extra duties, she accused me of not being a team player. The breaking point came during a staff meeting when our actual supervisor asked for volunteers to lead a new client onboarding project. I raised my hand to volunteer, but Patricia immediately interjected, saying she didn't think I was ready for that level of responsibility yet. She suggested that she should oversee my involvement in the project to ensure quality standards were maintained. Our supervisor looked confused and asked Patricia to clarify her role in evaluating my readiness for assignments. Patricia launched into an explanation about her informal supervisory responsibilities and how she'd been monitoring my progress since I started. The room went silent as everyone realized what was happening. After the meeting, our supervisor asked to speak with me privately. He apologized for not addressing Patricia's behavior sooner and explained that several people had mentioned her unusual approach to colleague relationships. He assured me that Patricia had no authority over my work or professional development and that her conduct was inappropriate. The next day, Patricia was called into a meeting with HR and our department head. I wasn't privy to the details of that conversation, but afterward, Patricia's attitude toward me changed dramatically. She became cold and professional, limiting our interactions to only what was necessary for work collaboration. Some of my co-workers mentioned that Patricia had tried similar behavior with previous new hires, but most people had either transferred to different departments or left the company before it became a major issue. Apparently, her territorial approach to seniority had been an ongoing concern that management had failed to address until now. Patricia still works in our department, but she no longer attempts to supervise or mentor anyone. She focuses on her own responsibilities and maintains cordial but distant relationships with colleagues. The whole experience taught me the importance of establishing clear boundaries early in workplace relationships and not being afraid to escalate inappropriate behavior to actual supervisors. That story is over. The delusion required to create your own supervisory role and then get offended when people don't respect your imaginary authority is truly something else. Patricia really thought 3 years of experience automatically made her everyone's boss and started conducting performance reviews like she was running the department. Some people will literally invent power structures in their head and then act shocked when reality doesn't cooperate with their fantasy. Let's move on to our next story, which involves some creative interpretations of workplace dress codes. My new employee showed up to work in a wedding dress because our handbook says business formal. I'm the office manager at a small law firm, and last month we hired a recent college graduate named Brittany for a receptionist position. During the interview process, she seemed professional and enthusiastic, with good communication skills and relevant coursework in business administration. On Brittany's first day, I plan to give her a tour of the office, introduce her to the team, and go over basic procedures and expectations. Our dress code policy states that employees should dress in business formal attire, which I assumed was self-explanatory for someone entering the professional workforce. When Brittany arrived that Monday morning, I genuinely thought she was either lost or attending someone else's wedding. She was wearing a full-length white gown with intricate beadwork, a flowing train, and what appeared to be a small tiara or decorative headpiece. The dress was beautiful, but completely inappropriate for any office environment I could imagine. I approached her carefully, thinking perhaps there had been some kind of emergency or unusual circumstance that required her to wear formal event attire to work. I asked if everything was okay and whether she needed to leave early for a special occasion. Brittany looked confused and assured me that everything was fine and that she was ready to start her first day. When I gently mentioned that her outfit seemed more appropriate for a wedding than for office work, Brittany pulled out a printed copy of our employee handbook. She pointed to the dress code section and explained that she had researched business formal attire online and determined that formal gowns fell within that category. I tried to clarify that business formal typically meant professional suits, conservative dresses, or similar office-appropriate clothing. Brittany argued that her gown was formal, therefore it met the business formal requirement. She seemed genuinely convinced that she had interpreted the policy correctly and couldn't understand why there would be any issue with her choice. The situation became more complicated when clients began arriving for their appointments. Our law firm handles primarily corporate and estate planning matters, so our clientele tends to be conservative professionals and elderly individuals. The reactions to Brittany's attire ranged from confused stares to audible gasps of surprise. One long-time client asked if we were hosting a wedding reception in the conference room. Another inquired whether Brittany was perhaps a bride who had stopped by to sign last-minute legal documents before her ceremony. The disruption to our normally quiet professional environment was significant and uncomfortable. I realized I needed to address the situation immediately, but I also wanted to be sensitive to Brittany's feelings, since she clearly believed she was following policy correctly. I asked her to step into my office for a private conversation about workplace attire, expectations, and professional norms. During our discussion, Brittany maintained that formal wear should be acceptable in any business formal environment. She mentioned that she had spent considerable money on the gown and felt it was elegant and appropriate for professional settings. She also expressed confusion about why there seemed to be different rules for different types of formal clothing. I spent about 30 minutes explaining the difference between business, formal, and special event formal wear. I showed her examples of appropriate business attire from professional clothing websites and explained how workplace dress codes are designed to create a consistent, professional atmosphere that won't distract from business operations. Brittany seemed to understand the explanation, but she was clearly disappointed and embarrassed. She hadn't brought any alternative clothing and lived about 45 minutes away from the office. I offered to let her leave early to change and return the next day with appropriate attire. The next morning, Brittany arrived wearing a conservative business suit that was perfect for our office environment. She apologized for the confusion and thanked me for taking the time to clarify expectations rather than simply sending her home. She explained that she had never worked in a professional office before and had relied on internet research rather than asking for specific examples. Brittany turned out to be an excellent employee once we got past the initial dress code misunderstanding. She's detail-oriented, professional with clients, and has a great attitude about learning new skills. The wedding dress incident became something we could laugh about after she'd been with us for a few months. I did update our employee handbook to include more specific examples of appropriate business formal attire to prevent similar confusion with future hires. Sometimes policies that seem obvious to experienced professionals can be genuinely confusing for people entering the workforce for the first time. That story's over. I have to admire the commitment to literal interpretation, but showing up to a law firm in a full wedding gown because the handbook said business formal is peak new graduate energy. The fact that she argued with her manager about formal wear technicalities while wearing a tiara makes this even better. At least she was a good sport about it once someone explained that business formal doesn't typically involve trains and beadwork. Our next story takes us into the world of office politics and some very creative expense reporting. My co-worker has been billing personal expenses to the company for months. I work in the finance department of a medium-sized marketing agency, and part of my job involves reviewing and processing expense reports from various departments. Most of these are straightforward business expenses like client lunches, travel costs, or office supplies purchased by employees who are later reimbursed by the company. About 6 months ago, I started noticing some unusual patterns in the expense reports submitted by one of our account managers, Tyler. At first, the irregularities were subtle enough that I almost missed them. A dinner receipt from an expensive restaurant on a night when I knew we didn't have any client meetings scheduled, or hotel charges from a weekend when no business travel had been approved. I initially assumed these were legitimate expenses that I simply wasn't aware of, since account managers often have client interactions that don't go through our central scheduling system. Tyler had been with the company for several years and had a good reputation, so I processed his reports without questioning the details. But as weeks went by, the questionable expenses became more frequent and more obviously personal. There were charges for spa treatments, premium grocery shopping, high-end electronics, and even what appeared to be vacation rental fees for properties in resort destinations. The amounts were significant, often totaling several $1,000s per month. What made Tyler's expense fraud particularly brazen was how he categorized these personal purchases. Spa treatments were listed as client entertainment expenses. Expensive electronics were described as necessary equipment for client presentations. Vacation rentals were categorized as temporary office space for off-site client meetings. His creativity in justifying personal expenses as business necessities was almost impressive. I started keeping detailed records of Tyler's suspicious expense reports, including the dates, amounts, and his explanations for each charge. I also began cross-referencing his reported business activities with our actual client schedules and project timelines. The discrepancies were obvious once I started looking systematically. The most egregious example was when Tyler submitted an expense report for a week-long trip to Hawaii that he claimed was for client development and market research. The expenses included luxury hotel accommodations, fine dining, recreational activities, and even a helicopter tour of the islands. The total cost to the company was over $8,000. I knew for certain that Tyler had no clients in Hawaii and that no market research projects had been approved for that region. When I checked with his supervisor about the trip, she had no knowledge of any business activities that would justify travel to Hawaii. Tyler had essentially taken a personal vacation and charged the entire cost to the company. At this point, I realized I needed to report Tyler's fraudulent expense reporting to management. I compiled all the evidence I had gathered over several months, including copies of suspicious receipts, documentation showing the lack of corresponding business activities, and calculations of the total amount of personal expenses he had charged to the company. When I presented this information to our CFO and HR director, they were shocked by the scope of Tyler's expense fraud. The total amount of questionable charges over the past year exceeded $30,000. They immediately launched a formal investigation and suspended Tyler pending the outcome. During the investigation, Tyler initially denied any wrongdoing and insisted that all his expenses were legitimate business costs. However, when confronted with specific evidence and asked to provide documentation of the business activities that justified each expense, he was unable to produce any supporting materials. Tyler eventually admitted to the expense fraud and was terminated immediately. The company also pursued legal action to recover the stolen funds and reported the matter to law enforcement. Tyler's actions constituted embezzlement, which is a serious criminal offence that can result in significant fines and prison time. The whole situation was particularly disappointing because Tyler had been a trusted employee who seemed to be performing well in his role. His supervisor mentioned that his actual work quality had never been questioned, and clients seemed to like working with him. He had thrown away a solid career for what amounted to funding a luxurious lifestyle at the company's expense. After Tyler's termination, our company implemented stricter expense reporting procedures, including more detailed documentation requirements and random audits of employee expense reports. We also provided additional training to managers about reviewing and approving expense reports from their team members. That story is over. The sheer boldness of billing a Hawaiian vacation as market research and expecting nobody to notice is genuinely impressive in its stupidity. Tyler really thought he could just live his best life on the company dime, and nobody would ever connect the dots between his spa days and the expense reports. $30,000 in fraudulent charges is basically a small salary, and he threw away his entire career for what amounts to a really expensive shopping spree. Moving on to our next workplace adventure, this one involves some interesting interpretations of professional communication. My boss started using text-speak in all official company communications. I work as a communications coordinator for a non-profit organization that focuses on environmental conservation. My boss, Leonard, is in his late 50s and recently discovered text messaging and social media. While I appreciate his enthusiasm for learning new technology, his adoption of casual texting language has created some serious professional communication issues. The problem started about 3 months ago when Leonard began incorporating text-speak abbreviations into his emails to staff members. At first, it was just simple things like using you instead of you or you are instead of your. I thought it might be a temporary phase as he got comfortable with digital communication, so I didn't address it immediately. But Leonard's use of text-speak quickly escalated beyond basic abbreviations. He started using phrases like, OMG, this is so important, in emails about budget meetings, and LOL, we need to talk ASAP, when discussing serious personnel issues. His messages became increasingly difficult to decipher, especially for older board members and donors who weren't familiar with text messaging conventions. The situation reached a breaking point when Leonard sent an official memo to our entire staff using almost exclusively text-speak and emoji. The subject line was important info for everyone, and the message included phrases like, we are having a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. and PL's RSVP if you can make it. He ended the memo with multiple emoji and TTYL everyone. Several staff members came to me asking for clarification about what Leonard was trying to communicate. Our older employees were particularly confused and concerned that they were missing important information because they couldn't understand the abbreviated language. One board member called to ask if Leonard's email account had been hacked because the communication style was so different from his usual professional tone. I realized I needed to have a conversation with Leonard about maintaining professional communication standards, especially in official company correspondence. I scheduled a private meeting to discuss the issue diplomatically, since I didn't want to discourage his interest in learning new technology. During our conversation, Leonard explained that he had been trying to modernize his communication style to better connect with younger staff members and volunteers. He had read articles about the importance of adapting to digital communication trends and thought that using text-speak would make him seem more approachable and current. I appreciated Leonard's intentions, but I explained that professional communication serves different purposes than personal texting. I outlined how official company communications need to be clear, easily understood by diverse audiences, and maintain the organization's professional reputation with donors, partners, and regulatory agencies. Leonard seemed genuinely surprised that his communication style was causing confusion rather than improving connection with staff. He hadn't considered that text-speak might be exclusionary for people who weren't familiar with the conventions, or that it might undermine the seriousness of important business communications. We worked together to develop communication guidelines that would allow Leonard to embrace digital tools while maintaining professional standards. We agreed that internal casual communications could be more relaxed, but official memos, donor correspondence, and external communication should follow traditional business writing conventions. Leonard was receptive to the feedback and immediately began adjusting his communication style. He started using proper spelling and grammar in official correspondence while still incorporating some modern digital communication elements, like strategic emoji use in appropriate contexts. His emails became much more effective at conveying important information clearly. The experience taught me the importance of providing constructive feedback about professional norms, even when someone's intentions are positive. Leonard's enthusiasm for learning new communication methods was admirable, but he needed guidance about when and how to apply different communication styles appropriately in a professional environment. That story is over. There's something endearing about a 50-something boss trying to connect with younger employees by turning board memos into text message conversations, but I can only imagine the confusion when donors started receiving official correspondence that looked like it came from a teenager. Leonard's heart was in the right place, but professional communication exists for a reason. An OMG budget crisis LOL probably isn't the tone you want when discussing financial emergencies with your board of directors. Let's dive into another story that shows how workplace boundaries can get seriously blurred. My co-worker brings her emotional support peacock to the office every day. I work at a small digital marketing agency with about 12 employees. We have a pretty relaxed office culture, casual dress code, and flexible work arrangements. Most people bring their lunch, we have a coffee station, and there's generally a friendly atmosphere where everyone gets along reasonably well. About 6 months ago, we hired a new graphic designer named Melissa, who seemed talented and enthusiastic during the interview process. She had an impressive portfolio and great references from her previous positions. During her first week, she mentioned that she had some anxiety issues and asked about our company's policy regarding emotional support animals. Our HR coordinator explained that we were happy to accommodate legitimate emotional support animals as long as proper documentation was provided and the animal didn't disrupt the work environment. Melissa seemed relieved and said she would bring in the necessary paperwork from her therapist within a few days. The following Monday, Melissa arrived at the office carrying what I initially thought was an elaborate feathered hat or some kind of costume prop. But as she walked through the door, I realized she was actually carrying a live peacock on her shoulder. The bird was fully grown, incredibly colorful, and making soft cooing sounds that echoed through our normally quiet workspace. Melissa set up what appeared to be a small perch next to her desk and gently placed the peacock on it. She introduced the bird to nearby co-workers as Fernando, her registered emotional support animal. She explained that Fernando helped her manage anxiety and provided comfort during stressful situations. She had all the proper documentation from her therapist recommending an emotional support animal for her mental health needs. At first, everyone was curious and somewhat amused by having a peacock in the office. Fernando was undeniably beautiful, and Melissa seemed much more relaxed and confident with him nearby. The bird was surprisingly well behaved, staying close to Melissa's workspace and not wandering around the office or bothering other employees. But within a few days, problems began emerging. Fernando would occasionally let out loud, piercing calls that could be heard throughout the entire office. These vocalizations usually happened during phone calls with clients, video conferences, or when people were trying to concentrate on detailed work. The timing seemed random and unpredictable. Fernando also had some bathroom habits that created hygiene concerns. Despite Melissa's efforts to keep his area clean, there were occasional accidents that required immediate cleanup and left lingering odors in our shared workspace. The office cleaning crew expressed concerns about properly sanitizing areas where Fernando spent time. The most significant issue was Fernando's reaction to sudden movements or loud noises. When someone dropped something, slammed a door, or even laughed loudly, Fernando would spread his magnificent tail feathers in what appeared to be a defensive display. While visually stunning, his full tailspan was nearly 6 feet wide and would knock over everything within reach of Melissa's desk. During one particularly important client presentation, Fernando became startled by the projector clicking on and let out a series of loud calls while displaying his full plumage. Our potential client was so distracted by the spectacle that they completely lost focus on our marketing proposal. We didn't get that contract, and I suspect Fernando's performance played a role in that outcome. Several co-workers began complaining privately about the disruptions Fernando was causing. People mentioned difficulty concentrating, concerns about allergies to bird dander, and general discomfort with having a large, unpredictable animal in their immediate work environment. The complaints weren't about Melissa personally, but about the practical challenges of sharing workspace with a peacock. I was designated to speak with Melissa about finding solutions that would allow her to keep Fernando while minimizing disruptions to other employees. I suggested perhaps creating a separate space for Fernando, adjusting his schedule to avoid peak concentration times, or exploring alternative accommodations for her emotional support needs. Melissa became defensive and accused me of discriminating against her mental health accommodations. She said Fernando was legally protected as her emotional support animal and that any attempts to restrict his presence would constitute disability discrimination. She threatened to file complaints with HR and potentially pursue legal action if Fernando wasn't allowed full access to the workplace. Our HR coordinator consulted with legal counsel about emotional support animal policies and workplace accommodation requirements, while Melissa had legitimate documentation for Fernando as an emotional support animal. There were questions about whether a peacock was appropriate for an office environment and whether reasonable accommodations could include some limitations on when and where Fernando could be present. The situation reached a crisis point when Fernando somehow got loose from his perch and wandered into our conference room during a board meeting. He knocked over a water pitcher, scattered papers everywhere, and let out several loud calls while our board members sat in stunned silence. One board member was actually afraid Fernando might attack and hid under the conference table until Melissa could retrieve him. After the board meeting incident, management decided that while they supported Melissa's need for emotional support accommodations, Fernando's presence was creating an unworkable situation for other employees and clients. They offered to help Melissa explore alternative accommodations, including modified work arrangements, additional break times, or assistance finding a more suitable emotional support animal for office environments. Melissa refused all alternative accommodations and insisted that Fernando was the only emotional support animal that effectively managed her anxiety. She maintained that any restrictions on Fernando's workplace access violated her rights and discriminated against her disability. She filed formal complaints with both HR and external agencies, claiming disability discrimination. Ultimately, Melissa and our company reached a settlement, allowing her to work remotely, full-time with Fernando in her home environment. This arrangement met her emotional support needs while eliminating the workplace disruptions that had been affecting other employees and business operations. That story is over. The mental image of a board meeting being interrupted by a loose peacock knocking over water pitchers while executives hide under tables is absolutely incredible. I genuinely feel for Melissa's anxiety struggles, but there's got to be some middle ground between no accommodations and having a 6-foot wingspan disrupting client presentations. Sometimes the most well-intentioned workplace policies create situations nobody could have predicted, and Fernando definitely falls into that category. Let's move into another story about workplace dynamics that got seriously out of hand. My manager started timing my bathroom breaks with a stopwatch. I work as a customer service representative at a call center that handles technical support for a software company. The job involves taking back-to-back calls from frustrated customers, troubleshooting complex technical issues, and maintaining detailed records of each interaction. It's demanding work that requires concentration and patience, especially during busy periods when call volumes are high. My supervisor, Kenneth, has been with the company for about 8 years and takes his management responsibilities very seriously. He's known for being detail-oriented and maintaining strict adherence to company policies and performance metrics. Most employees respect his knowledge and experience, though some find his management style somewhat micromanaging. About 3 months ago, Kenneth began implementing what he called enhanced productivity monitoring for our team. He explained that corporate headquarters was pressuring managers to improve efficiency metrics and reduce non-productive time during shifts. This included more detailed tracking of break times, call handling speeds, and time spent on administrative tasks. Initially, Kenneth's new monitoring procedures seemed reasonable. He asked us to log break times more precisely and provided feedback about call resolution times compared to department averages. He emphasized that these measures were designed to help us improve our performance and meet corporate expectations rather than to punish anyone. But Kenneth's monitoring quickly became more invasive and uncomfortable. He started walking around the call center with a clipboard, noting when people left their desks and exactly what time they returned. He would position himself near the restroom entrance and observe who went in and how long they stayed. His behavior was becoming noticeably obsessive. The situation escalated when Kenneth began carrying a stopwatch and timing individual bathroom breaks. He would click the stopwatch when someone stood up to use the restroom and click it again when they returned to their desk. He kept detailed logs of these times and would approach employees whose bathroom breaks exceeded what he considered acceptable durations. Kenneth established an unofficial policy that bathroom breaks should not exceed 5 minutes, including travel time to and from the restroom. He would confront employees who took longer breaks and ask them to explain what they were doing during the additional time. These conversations were embarrassing and felt like interrogations about personal bodily functions. One particularly uncomfortable incident occurred when I returned from a bathroom break that had taken about 7 minutes due to an upset stomach. Kenneth approached me with his stopwatch and asked why I had exceeded the acceptable time limit. When I explained that I had been feeling unwell, he suggested I should notify him in advance if I expected to need extended bathroom time due to health issues. Kenneth's bathroom monitoring created a hostile and stressful work environment where people felt anxious about natural bodily functions. Employees began avoiding drinking water during their shifts to minimize restroom visits, which led to dehydration and decreased concentration during customer calls. Some people started rushing through bathroom breaks in ways that were uncomfortable and unhealthy. The breaking point came when Kenneth installed a sign-out sheet outside the restroom door. He required all employees to write their name, departure time, and return time whenever they used the facilities. This level of monitoring felt degrading and invasive, treating adult employees like children who couldn't be trusted to manage their own bathroom needs responsibly. Several employees complained to HR about Kenneth's bathroom monitoring policies. We explained that the constant surveillance was creating anxiety, health concerns, and a generally uncomfortable work environment. We provided documentation of Kenneth's timing practices and the detailed logs he'd been maintaining about our restroom usage. HR conducted an investigation and determined that Kenneth's monitoring practices were excessive and inappropriate for a workplace environment. While employers can track general productivity and break times, timing individual bathroom breaks with stopwatches and requiring detailed explanations for restroom visits crossed professional boundaries. Kenneth was required to attend additional management training focused on appropriate workplace supervision and employee privacy rights. He was also instructed to discontinue all bathroom-related monitoring and remove the sign-out sheet from the restroom area. The company implemented clearer guidelines about reasonable productivity monitoring versus invasive surveillance. After the HR intervention, Kenneth's management style became more professional and less intrusive. He continued tracking general performance metrics, but stopped the obsessive monitoring of personal activities like bathroom breaks. The work environment became much more comfortable, and employee morale improved significantly. The whole experience taught me the importance of speaking up when workplace policies or management practices become unreasonable, even when they're presented as necessary for business operations. Sometimes managers can lose perspective about appropriate boundaries, and employee feedback is necessary to maintain a professional and respectful work environment. That story is over. The image of a grown man with a stopwatch lurking outside the bathroom door, like some kind of restroom security guard, is both hilarious and deeply disturbing. Kenneth really thought corporate productivity metrics meant he needed to become the bathroom police and time people's biological functions. There's workplace efficiency, and then there's whatever psychological issues were driving Kenneth to interrogate employees about their 7-minute bathroom breaks. Here's our next story about someone who took workplace creativity to some very interesting places. My co-worker started a side business using company resources and tried to recruit clients during meetings. I work in the marketing department of a regional healthcare system where we handle advertising campaigns, community outreach, and internal communications for multiple hospital locations. Our team is small but close-knit, and we generally collaborate well on projects while maintaining professional boundaries. Last year, we hired a new marketing specialist named Vanessa, who had previous experience in both healthcare marketing and event planning. During her interview, she mentioned her background in coordinating weddings and corporate events as freelance work, which we thought could bring valuable skills to our healthcare marketing campaigns. For the first few months, Vanessa was an excellent addition to our team. She brought fresh creative ideas to our campaigns, had strong attention to detail, and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about healthcare marketing. Her event planning background was particularly helpful when we organised community health fairs and educational seminars for patients and families. Around her 6-month mark, Vanessa began mentioning her freelance event planning business more frequently in casual conversations. She would share stories about weddings she had coordinated, corporate events she had managed, and her plans to expand her client base. Initially, these conversations seemed like normal workplace chat about outside interests and career goals. But gradually, Vanessa's event planning discussions became more prominent and started interfering with work-related conversations. During team meetings about healthcare campaigns, she would somehow steer discussions toward event planning strategies and mention how her freelance experience could benefit our projects. Her comments were often relevant but seemed designed to promote her outside business. The situation became more concerning when I noticed Vanessa using company computers, printers, and office supplies for what appeared to be personal business activities. She would print elaborate event proposals on our letterhead, use our colour printer for marketing materials, and spend significant time during work hours managing what seemed to be freelance client communications. Vanessa also began scheduling personal business calls during work hours, often taking these calls at her desk or in conference rooms that were supposed to be available for company meetings. Her conversations were clearly about wedding planning, vendor coordination, and client consultations rather than healthcare marketing projects. The most problematic behaviour emerged during client meetings and community events, where Vanessa would subtly promote her event planning services. During a community health fair, I overheard her giving her business card to several attendees and discussing her availability for wedding planning services. She was essentially using company-sponsored events to network for her personal business. At a meeting with hospital administrators about an upcoming patient education campaign, Vanessa somehow worked her event planning credentials into the conversation and mentioned her availability for corporate event coordination. The administrators seemed confused about why our marketing specialist was promoting unrelated services during a healthcare marketing discussion. I realised that Vanessa was using her position with our healthcare system to legitimise and promote her freelance event planning business. She was leveraging our company's reputation, resources, and client relationships to build her personal brand and attract new customers for services completely unrelated to her job responsibilities. The situation reached a breaking point when Vanessa submitted an expense report that included charges for event planning supplies she had purchased for a wedding client. She had categorized these expenses as materials for a healthcare marketing campaign, essentially asking our company to fund her freelance business operations. I felt obligated to report Vanessa's behavior to our department manager, since her activities were affecting our team's productivity and potentially creating conflicts of interest with our healthcare marketing responsibilities. I documented the various incidents I had observed, including her use of company resources, client recruitment activities, and inappropriate expense submissions. Our department manager conducted an investigation and discovered that Vanessa had been systematically using company time and resources to operate her freelance business. She had been storing client files on company servers, using our office address for business correspondence, and even listing her healthcare system email address on event planning promotional materials. When confronted with this evidence, Vanessa argued that her event planning skills enhanced her value as a healthcare marketing employee and that cross-promoting services was common in marketing industries. She claimed that her freelance work was helping her develop skills that benefited our healthcare campaigns. Management explained that while employees were allowed to have outside interests and freelance work, Using company resources and time for personal business activities violated employment policies and created potential conflicts of interest. Vanessa was given the opportunity to separate her freelance activities from her healthcare marketing responsibilities. Vanessa chose to resign rather than discontinue her use of company resources for her event planning business. She apparently decided that her freelance work was more profitable than her healthcare marketing position and wanted to focus entirely on building her event planning company. After Vanessa's departure, we had to review all her previous work to ensure that healthcare marketing projects had been completed properly and that no company resources or client relationships had been inappropriately used for her personal business developments. That story is over. The boldness of submitting expense reports for wedding supplies while categorizing them as healthcare marketing materials is truly next-level workplace fraud. Vanessa really thought she could turn her marketing job into a launching pad for her event planning empire, and nobody would notice her recruiting clients during hospital meetings. Using company letterhead to print wedding proposals is the kind of audacity that almost deserves respect, if it weren't completely unethical. Let's move on to a story that involves some very creative interpretations of workplace flexibility. My co-worker thinks working from home means she can disappear for hours at a time. I'm a project manager at a software development company that transitioned to hybrid work arrangements after the pandemic. Most of our team works from home 3 days a week and comes into the office 2 days a week. The arrangement has worked well for maintaining productivity while giving employees better work-life balance. When we hired Rebecca as a junior developer 6 months ago, she specifically mentioned during her interview how much she valued flexible work arrangements and remote work opportunities. She seemed enthusiastic about our hybrid model and assured us she was self-motivated and experienced with remote collaboration tools. For the first month, Rebecca's remote work performance seemed solid. She attended video meetings on time, responded to messages promptly, and submitted her coding assignments by established deadlines. Her work quality was good, and she seemed to be integrating well with our development team. But around her second month, I started noticing gaps in Rebecca's availability during remote work days. She would join our morning stand-up meeting at 9 a.m., but then become completely unresponsive for hours at a time. Messages would go unanswered for 3 or 4 hours, and she wouldn't respond to urgent requests for clarification on project specifications. When I asked Rebecca about her communication delays, she explained that she was focusing deeply on coding tasks and preferred to work in uninterrupted blocks of time. She said constant messaging disrupted her concentration and that batching communication was more efficient for complex development work. I understood the value of deep work sessions, but Rebecca's unavailability was creating problems for our team collaboration. Other developers needed her input on shared code repositories, and clients were asking questions about features she was implementing. Her communication gaps were causing project delays and frustrating team members who couldn't get timely responses. The situation became more problematic when Rebecca started missing scheduled video conferences and project check-ins. She would simply not show up for meetings without any advance notice or explanation. When I reached out afterward, she would apologize and claim she had been deeply focused on urgent coding tasks and lost track of time. During one particularly important client presentation, where Rebecca was supposed to demonstrate a feature she had developed, she was completely unreachable. We had to reschedule the entire presentation because Rebecca didn't respond to calls, texts, or instant messages. The client was understandably frustrated by the unprofessional handling of their scheduled demo. When I finally connected with Rebecca that afternoon, she explained that she had taken her laptop to a coffee shop for a change of scenery and hadn't realized the Wi-Fi wasn't working properly. She said she had been coding offline and didn't notice the missed messages and meeting invitations until she got home and reconnected to reliable internet. I began documenting Rebecca's availability patterns and discovered that her remote work days had significant gaps where she was completely unreachable. Sometimes these gaps lasted from mid-morning until late afternoon, essentially meaning she was only available for a few hours during what were supposed to be full work days. The breaking point came when I decided to do a surprise check on Rebecca's work progress. I assigned her a coding task on a Tuesday morning and asked for a status update by lunchtime. When she didn't respond by 2 p.m., I drove to her apartment complex to see if there was some kind of emergency. Rebecca's car wasn't in her assigned parking spot, and her apartment appeared empty when I knocked on the door. I waited around for about 30 minutes and eventually saw her return carrying shopping bags and wearing workout clothes. She seemed genuinely surprised to see me and asked if something urgent had happened at work. When I asked about the coding task I had assigned that morning, Rebecca looked confused and said she hadn't seen any messages about urgent work. She claimed she had been running errands and going to the gym, assuming it was acceptable to manage her own schedule as long as she completed her assigned projects by their deadlines. I explained that remote work still required being available during business hours for collaboration, meetings, and urgent requests. Rebecca seemed surprised by this expectation and said she thought working from home meant having complete flexibility to structure her day however she preferred, as long as she delivered quality work products. During our conversation, Rebecca revealed that she had been treating remote work days as personal time, where she could run errands, attend fitness classes, meet friends for lunch, and handle personal appointments. She would work on coding projects in the evenings or early mornings to meet her deadlines, but wasn't available for team collaboration during standard business hours. I had to explain that remote work doesn't mean working whenever you feel like it, but rather working from a different location while maintaining professional availability and communication standards. Rebecca seemed genuinely confused about these expectations and said no one had explained remote work policies clearly during her onboarding. We developed a clear remote work agreement outlining availability expectations, communication response times, and meeting attendance requirements. Rebecca agreed to maintain regular business hours even when working from home and to notify the team in advance if she needed to step away for personal matters during work time. Rebecca's performance improved significantly once she understood the actual expectations for remote work. She began maintaining consistent availability during business hours and became much more responsive to team communications. She admitted that she had misunderstood remote work flexibility and appreciated having clear guidelines. The whole experience taught me the importance of explicitly outlining remote work expectations, rather than assuming employees understand professional standards for working from home. What seems obvious to experienced remote workers can be genuinely confusing for people who are new to flexible work arrangements. That story is over. The idea that working from home means you can just disappear for gym sessions and shopping trips while your team scrambles to find you is absolutely wild. Rebecca really thought remote work was code for do whatever you want as long as you eventually get some coding done. The mental image of her manager showing up at her apartment complex like some kind of workplace detective, only to find her returning from errands in workout clothes, is peak remote work chaos. Let's dive into our next story about someone who had some very unique ideas about professional development. My employee started charging co-workers for training sessions on skills she doesn't actually have. I manage a customer service department for an online retail company, and we employ about 20 representatives who handle phone calls, chat support, and email inquiries from customers. Most of our team members are entry-level employees who are eager to develop new skills and advance their careers within the company. 6 months ago, we hired Natalie as a customer service representative with previous experience in retail and some college coursework in business administration. During her interview, she mentioned interest in eventually moving into training or supervisory roles and seemed motivated to take on additional responsibilities beyond her basic job duties. Natalie quickly established herself as someone who was confident and outgoing with both customers and co-workers. She would offer advice to newer employees about handling difficult customer situations and seemed knowledgeable about various customer service techniques. Her enthusiasm for helping others develop their skills was initially refreshing. About 3 months into her employment, Natalie began mentioning that she had extensive training experience from previous jobs and offered to help co-workers improve their customer service skills during lunch breaks or after work. Several team members expressed interest in additional training opportunities since our company's formal training budget was limited. Natalie started scheduling what she called professional development sessions in our conference room during lunch periods. She would present information about communication techniques, conflict resolution strategies, and customer psychology. These sessions seemed helpful, and several employees mentioned that they found her advice useful for handling challenging customer interactions. But then Natalie began charging fees for her training sessions. She started asking attendees to contribute $5 per session to cover what she called materials and preparation costs. She explained that she was investing significant time in developing training content and that the small fee would help her continue offering these valuable professional development opportunities. Some employees were willing to pay the fee because they felt Natalie's training was beneficial and more personalized than generic online courses. Others were uncomfortable with the idea of paying a coworker for training during work hours, but didn't want to seem unsupportive of professional development initiatives. The situation became more concerning when Natalie began advertising her training services more formally. She created flyers promoting herself as a certified customer service trainer and posted them around the office. She established a sign-up system for different training topics and started charging different rates based on the complexity of the subject matter. I became suspicious when I noticed that Natalie's training topics were expanding beyond basic customer service into areas like project management, leadership development, and digital marketing. These were subjects that weren't directly related to her job responsibilities or previous experience, and I wondered where she was getting expertise in such diverse areas. When I asked Natalie about her training certifications and background, she provided vague responses about previous workplace experience and online courses she had completed. She couldn't produce any official certifications or documentation of formal training credentials, but insisted that her practical experience qualified her to teach these subjects. I decided to investigate Natalie's training content more thoroughly by asking some employees who had attended her sessions about what they were learning. I discovered that much of her material was copied directly from free online resources and YouTube videos, with no original content or personalized instruction. Even more problematic was that some of the information Natalie was teaching was incorrect or outdated. Her conflict resolution techniques included strategies that could actually escalate customer complaints rather than resolve them. Her advice about company policies was sometimes completely wrong and could have led to compliance issues if employees had followed her guidance. The breaking point came when I learned that Natalie had been scheduling her paid training sessions during regular work hours and encouraging employees to attend instead of taking their assigned breaks. She was essentially running a side business using company time and resources while providing potentially harmful training to my team members. When I confronted Natalie about her unauthorized training business, she became defensive and argued that she was providing valuable professional development that the company wasn't offering. She said employees were choosing to pay for her services because they recognized the value she was providing, and that she wasn't forcing anyone to participate. I explained that employees aren't allowed to run side businesses on company property during work hours, especially when those businesses involved charging co-workers for services. I also expressed concerns about the accuracy of her training content and the potential liability issues if employees received incorrect information about company policies or customer service procedures. Natalie argued that her training sessions were helping employee morale, and professional development, and that the company should be grateful for her initiative in providing additional learning opportunities. She couldn't understand why I was discouraging employee growth and skill development. I had to terminate Natalie's employment due to multiple policy violations, including running an unauthorized business on company property, misrepresenting her qualifications, and providing potentially harmful training information to other employees. The situation created confusion and disappointment among team members who had been paying for her services. After Natalie's departure, I had to retrain several employees who had received incorrect information during her paid sessions. We also implemented clearer policies about outside business activities and established formal channels for employees to request additional professional development opportunities through legitimate training providers. That story is over. The sheer entrepreneurial spirit of charging your own co-workers for fake training sessions using material you copied from YouTube is honestly impressive in its complete inappropriateness. Natalie really built an entire side hustle around pretending to be a certified trainer while giving out information that could actually harm people's job performance. The fact that she was genuinely confused about why her manager might have a problem with her running a scam operation in the company conference room shows a stunning lack of professional awareness. Moving on to another tale of workplace creativity gone completely wrong. My co-worker started selling essential oils during team meetings and claimed they could cure work-related stress. I work in the accounting department of a manufacturing company where we handle payroll, accounts receivable, and financial reporting for multiple plant locations. Our team consists of 8 accountants and support staff who work closely together during busy periods like month-end closing and annual audits. 3 months ago, we hired Christine as a staff accountant with several years of experience at smaller firms. She seemed competent and professional during the interview process, with solid technical skills and good references from previous employers. Her background in both public and private accounting appeared to be a good fit for our diverse responsibilities. Christine integrated well into our team initially, contributing effectively to our monthly closing processes and demonstrating strong attention to detail in her work. She was friendly with co-workers and seemed enthusiastic about learning our company's specific accounting procedures and software systems. About 6 weeks after starting, Christine began mentioning her interest in natural health and wellness approaches to managing work stress. She would talk about the benefits of aromatherapy, herbal supplements, and holistic lifestyle changes during casual conversations with team members. These discussions seemed harmless and even beneficial for workplace wellness. Christine started bringing small bottles of essential oils to work and would occasionally diffuse lavender or peppermint scents at her desk. She explained that certain scents helped her maintain focus and reduce anxiety during stressful periods like deadline crunches. Several co-workers commented positively on the pleasant aromas and asked about her oil collection. The situation began changing when Christine started positioning herself as an expert on essential oils and their therapeutic benefits. She would make specific claims about which oils could improve concentration, reduce headaches, boost energy levels, and alleviate various stress-related symptoms. Her recommendations became increasingly detailed and medical in nature. During our weekly team meetings, Christine began incorporating essential oil demonstrations into discussions about workplace wellness and stress management. She would bring samples of different oils and explain their supposed benefits for common workplace issues like fatigue, tension headaches, and deadline anxiety. At first, these wellness tips seemed like a nice addition to our team meetings, especially during busy periods when everyone was feeling overwhelmed. Christine appeared knowledgeable and genuinely concerned about helping her co-workers manage stress more effectively through natural remedies. But then Christine started selling essential oils to co-workers and promoting a multi-level marketing business she had joined. She began our team meetings by presenting new products, sharing testimonials about their effectiveness, and encouraging team members to purchase starter kits or monthly subscriptions for various oil blends. Christine claimed that certain essential oil combinations could completely eliminate work-related stress, improve job performance, and even prevent common workplace illnesses like colds and headaches. She presented these claims as scientifically proven facts, rather than personal opinions or marketing materials from her MLM company. Several team members felt pressured to purchase oils from Christine because she was making these sales pitches during mandatory work meetings where declining to participate felt awkward and potentially harmful to workplace relationships. Her sales presentations were taking up significant time during meetings that were supposed to focus on accounting deadlines and project coordination. The situation became more problematic when Christine started suggesting that employees who were experiencing work stress or health issues should rely on her essential oil recommendations instead of seeking traditional medical care or using established employee assistance programs. She positioned herself as a wellness consultant rather than just a co-worker sharing personal interests. One particularly concerning incident occurred when a team member mentioned having persistent salt or headaches during a stressful audit period. Christine immediately recommended a specific oil blend that she claimed would eliminate the headaches without needing to address underlying causes like poor ergonomics, eye strain, or excessive work hours. I realized that Christine's essential oil sales were creating an uncomfortable work environment where employees felt pressured to purchase products from a co-worker and were receiving potentially harmful medical advice disguised as workplace wellness initiatives. Her MLM activities were also taking time away from our actual accounting responsibilities. When I spoke with Christine about separating her essential oil business from her accounting work, she became defensive and argued that she was providing valuable wellness resources that were improving team morale and productivity. She claimed that her oil recommendations were helping co-workers manage stress more effectively than traditional approaches. Christine insisted that her essential oil business was actually benefiting the company by reducing sick days, improving focus, and creating a more positive work environment. She couldn't understand why I would discourage natural health approaches that were clearly helping her co-workers feel better. I explained that employees shouldn't feel pressured to purchase products from co-workers during work hours, and that making medical claims about essential oils could create liability issues for both Christine and the company. I also pointed out that her sales presentations were taking time away from important accounting deadlines. Christine argued that essential oils were natural products with no harmful side effects, and that she was simply sharing information about wellness approaches that had worked for her personally. She said restricting her ability to help co-workers with stress management was actually harmful to workplace wellness. We had to establish clear policies about soliciting co-workers for personal business ventures and making health-related claims in the workplace. Christine was required to stop selling essential oils to team members and remove all wellness-related sales materials from work meetings and her workspace. Christine complied with the new policies, but seemed resentful about not being allowed to share what she considered valuable wellness information with her co-workers. She continued working in our department but maintained a more distant relationship with team members who had previously been interested in her essential oil recommendations. That story is over. The image of mandatory accounting meetings being hijacked by essential oil sales pitches is absolutely surreal. Christine really thought she could turn monthly budget reviews into wellness seminars and convince people that peppermint oil was the solution to audit season stress. The fact that she genuinely believed she was providing medical consultation rather than running a pyramid scheme shows how deep the MLM delusion can go. Here's our final story, for this part about someone who took workplace efficiency to some very questionable places. My boss implemented a point system for employee bathroom breaks and water fountain visits. I work as an administrative assistant at a small insurance agency that employs about 15 people in various roles, including agents, claims processors, and support staff. Our office environment has always been relatively relaxed with flexible break schedules and reasonable management oversight of daily activities. Last year, we got a new office manager named Gregory, who had previously worked in manufacturing environments with more structured productivity monitoring systems. He was hired to improve efficiency and implement better organizational systems for our growing business operations. Initially, Gregory's changes were positive and helpful. He streamlined our filing systems, improved our client database organization, and established clearer procedures for handling various administrative tasks. His background in process improvement seemed like exactly what our somewhat disorganized office needed. About 3 months after Gregory started, he began expressing concerns about what he perceived as excessive non-productive time during work hours. He mentioned that employees seemed to take frequent breaks, spend too much time away from their desks, and weren't maintaining consistent focus on their assigned responsibilities. Gregory announced that he would be implementing a productivity enhancement system designed to help employees become more aware of their time management and develop better work habits. He presented this as a positive development that would benefit both individual performance and overall office efficiency. The system Gregory created involved assigning point values to various workplace activities and behaviors. Employees would earn positive points for productive activities like completing tasks early, attending meetings promptly, and helping co-workers. We would lose points for activities Gregory classified as non-productive or inefficient. At first, the point system seemed quirky but harmless. Gregory would award points for things like organizing workspaces, submitting reports ahead of deadlines, or contributing ideas during team meetings. The positive reinforcement aspect was actually motivating for some employees who enjoyed the recognition. But then Gregory started assigning negative point values to basic human needs and normal workplace activities. Using the bathroom cost 2 points per visit, with additional point deductions for trips lasting longer than 5 minutes. Getting water from the fountain cost 1 point, and taking longer than 30 seconds resulted in additional penalties. Gregory installed a clipboard system where employees had to log their bathroom breaks and water fountain visits, including timestamps and duration. He would review these logs daily and calculate point deductions based on what he determined was excessive personal time during work hours. The point system became increasingly elaborate and punitive. Gregory assigned different point values based on the time of day, with higher penalties for bathroom breaks during what he considered peak productivity hours. He also implemented bonus point deductions for employees who used the bathroom more than 3 times during an 8-hour shift. Employees began experiencing anxiety about normal bodily functions and basic hydration needs. People started avoiding drinking water to minimize bathroom visits, leading to dehydration headaches and decreased concentration during client interactions. The work environment became tense and uncomfortable as everyone worried about point deductions. Gregory expanded the point system to include other normal workplace activities like personal phone calls during lunch breaks, brief conversations with co-workers, and even adjusting thermostats or window blinds. Everything that wasn't directly productive work became subject to point penalties. The breaking point came when Gregory announced that employees with negative point balances at the end of each week would receive written warnings about their productivity levels. He suggested that consistent negative point totals could lead to performance improvement plans or potential disciplinary actions. Several employees approached me privately to express concerns about the point system and its impact on workplace morale and basic human dignity. People felt degraded by having to justify bathroom breaks and water consumption to their supervisor, and the constant monitoring was creating a hostile work environment. I decided to document the point system and present concerns to our company's owner, who had been largely uninvolved in day-to-day office management since hiring Gregory. I compiled examples of the point deductions, employee feedback about the system's impact, and information about potential legal issues related to monitoring basic human needs. When our owner learned about Gregory's point system, he was shocked and immediately ordered its discontinuation. He explained that monitoring employee bathroom breaks and water consumption was inappropriate, potentially discriminatory, and could create liability issues for the company. Gregory was required to remove all monitoring systems related to personal activities and apologize to employees for implementing policies that violated basic workplace dignity. He was also enrolled in management training focused on appropriate supervision techniques and employee rights. The whole experience taught our team the importance of speaking up when management policies become unreasonable or dehumanizing, even when they're presented as productivity improvements. Sometimes efficiency measures can go too far and actually harm both employee well-being and overall workplace effectiveness. That story is over. The mental image of grown adults having to log their bathroom visits on a clipboard while their boss calculates point deductions for basic human functions is both hilarious and deeply disturbing. Gregory really thought he could gamify people's bladder schedules and turn hydration into a productivity metric. The fact that he was genuinely surprised when his bathroom surveillance system was shut down shows a complete disconnect from basic workplace humanity. These workplace stories really make you appreciate when your biggest office drama is someone microwaving fish in the break room or forgetting to replace the water cooler bottle. From peacocks in board meetings to essential oil sales pitches during budget reviews, it's amazing how creative people can get when it comes to making their co-workers' lives more complicated than necessary. But sometimes, the most outrageous workplace behavior comes from the people who think they've found loopholes in basic human decency. Let me share this next story about someone who discovered just how far their co-worker was willing to push boundaries. My co-worker started bringing her newborn to work and expects everyone else to help with childcare. I work at a small non-profit organisation that focuses on community outreach programs. We have about 12 employees, and everyone generally gets along well in our casual, family-friendly environment. The work can be demanding during grant application seasons, but we usually support each other through busy periods. 2 months ago, my colleague Miranda returned from maternity leave with what seemed like a reasonable plan to balance work and new motherhood. She had arranged for her mother to provide childcare 3 days a week and planned to work from home the other 2 days. The arrangement seemed thoughtful and sustainable for everyone involved, but during Miranda's second week back, her childcare arrangements fell through when her mother had a medical emergency and couldn't continue helping with the baby. Miranda was understandably stressed about finding alternative childcare on short notice, especially given our non-profit's limited budget for employee benefits. Miranda asked if she could bring her 3-month-old daughter to the office temporarily while she searched for a new childcare provider. She assured everyone it would only be for a few days, and that the baby was generally quiet and easy to manage during work hours. Most of the team was sympathetic and agreed to help accommodate this temporary solution. The first day went reasonably well. Miranda set up a small area near her desk with a portable crib and baby supplies. Her daughter slept most of the morning, and Miranda was able to handle phone calls and computer work without major disruptions. When the baby needed attention, Miranda would step away briefly to handle feeding or diaper changes. But by the second day, problems began emerging. The baby was more fussy and required frequent attention throughout the day. Miranda would have to step out of meetings to calm her crying daughter, and phone calls with clients were interrupted by baby sounds in the background. The disruptions were becoming noticeable and affecting our professional image. What made the situation more problematic was that Miranda began expecting her co-workers to help with basic childcare tasks. She would ask people to hold the baby during important phone calls, watch her daughter while she attended meetings, or help with feeding and diaper changes when she was overwhelmed with work deadlines. At first, several co-workers were happy to help occasionally, especially those who had children themselves, and understood the challenges of balancing work and parenting responsibilities. But Miranda's requests for assistance became more frequent and demanding, essentially treating the office like a collaborative childcare facility. Miranda would schedule meetings and then ask whoever was available to watch her baby during those times. She assigned informal childcare rotations during lunch breaks, expecting different co-workers to supervise her daughter so she could eat without interruption. She even asked people to take the baby for walks around the building when she needed to concentrate on detailed work. The situation became untenable when Miranda started leaving her baby with co-workers for extended periods while she ran personal errands or attended appointments outside the office. She would announce that she needed to step out for a few hours and designate someone to be responsible for her daughter until she returned. One particularly problematic incident occurred during a visit from potential grant funders who were touring our facilities and meeting with staff about our community programs. Miranda's baby began crying loudly during the presentation, and instead of handling the situation herself, she gestured for a co-worker to take the baby out of the room while she continued with the meeting. Our executive director had to address the situation when it became clear that Miranda's childcare expectations were affecting everyone's ability to perform their job responsibilities effectively. Several employees had privately expressed concerns about being assigned unpaid babysitting duties during work hours. During the conversation, Miranda became defensive and accused the organization of not being truly family-friendly despite claiming to support working parents. She argued that a few weeks of temporary childcare assistance shouldn't be a problem in a workplace that valued community and mutual support. Miranda seemed genuinely surprised that her co-workers weren't happy to help with childcare duties, and couldn't understand why anyone would object to spending time with her adorable baby. She felt that the office environment should naturally accommodate her needs as a new mother, regardless of how those needs affected other employees. The executive director explained that while the organization wanted to support Miranda during this challenging time, expecting co-workers to provide regular childcare wasn't a sustainable or appropriate solution. Other employees had their own job responsibilities and shouldn't be required to supervise children during work hours. Miranda was given 2 weeks to arrange professional childcare or work-from-home accommodations. She initially threatened to file complaints about workplace discrimination against parents, but ultimately found a childcare provider and returned to normal work arrangements. The temporary crisis passed, but the experience highlighted the importance of clear boundaries around workplace accommodations. That story is over. The entitlement of turning your entire office into an unpaid daycare service and then acting shocked when people object is genuinely astounding. Miranda really thought community-minded non-profit work meant her colleagues had signed up to be rotating babysitters during grant presentations. The image of her gesturing for someone else to remove her crying baby while she continued meeting with funders is peak workplace audacity. At least she figured out actual childcare arrangements instead of doubling down on the collaborative parenting approach. Here's another story about someone who took workplace flexibility to some very creative extremes. My employee started running a food truck from our company parking lot during lunch breaks. I'm the facilities manager for a mid-sized technology company located in an office park outside the city centre. We have about 60 employees and a large parking lot that rarely reaches full capacity, even during busy periods when everyone is working on site. 6 months ago, we hired Trevor as an IT support specialist with good technical skills and previous experience in corporate environments. He seemed professional during the interview process and had solid references from his previous positions. His background in both hardware and software support made him a good fit for our diverse technology needs. Trevor performed well in his new role, quickly learning our systems and providing helpful technical support to employees across different departments. He was friendly, reliable, and seemed to genuinely enjoy solving complex technical problems. His integration into our IT team was smooth and positive. After about 2 months, Trevor mentioned during casual conversation that he had always been interested in cooking and had been considering starting a small food service business as a side venture. He talked about his family's recipes and his dream of eventually opening a restaurant. His enthusiasm for cooking was clear, and several co-workers encouraged his entrepreneurial interests. Trevor began bringing elaborate homemade lunches that attracted attention from other employees. His meals looked restaurant quality and smelled incredible, often featuring complex dishes from various international cuisines. People would compliment his cooking skills and joke that he should start selling his food. What I didn't realize was that Trevor was taking these suggestions seriously and developing a business plan around his lunchtime cooking. He started researching food service regulations, licensing requirements, and the logistics of operating a mobile food business. His casual interest in cooking was evolving into a concrete entrepreneurial venture. The first sign of Trevor's food truck ambitions appeared when he began bringing significantly larger quantities of food and offering to sell portions to interested co-workers. He would set up an informal lunch service in our break room, taking orders in the morning and delivering prepared meals at lunchtime for a reasonable fee. Initially, Trevor's lunch service seemed like a convenient option for employees who didn't want to drive to restaurants or eat cafeteria food from the building next door. His prices were fair, the food was excellent, and the arrangement felt like a friendly favour rather than a formal business operation. But Trevor's lunch service quickly expanded beyond what could reasonably be considered a casual favour for co-workers. He started taking advance orders, creating daily menus, and establishing regular pricing for different meal options. He was essentially operating a restaurant out of our office break room. The situation escalated dramatically when Trevor arrived at work one morning, driving a fully equipped food truck that he parked prominently in our company parking lot. The truck was professionally wrapped with colourful graphics advertising Trevor's mobile kitchen and featured serving windows, menu boards, and all the equipment necessary for commercial food preparation. Trevor explained that he had purchased the food truck over the weekend and planned to operate it during lunch hours to serve both our employees and other businesses in the office park. He had obtained the necessary permits and licenses for mobile food service and was excited to launch his entrepreneurial venture. While I appreciated Trevor's initiative and business ambitions, I was concerned about him using our company property to operate a commercial food service without discussing this arrangement with management. Our parking lot wasn't zoned for commercial activities, and we hadn't agreed to host a food truck business on our premises. Trevor seemed surprised by my concerns and explained that he was only using a small portion of the parking lot during lunch hours when most spaces were empty anyway. He argued that his food truck was providing a valuable service to employees and wasn't interfering with company operations in any meaningful way. I explained that operating a commercial business on company property required proper approvals, insurance considerations, and compliance with local zoning regulations. Even though Trevor had obtained food service permits, he hadn't addressed the property use issues or potential liability concerns for our company. Trevor offered to pay a rental fee for using parking space during lunch hours, treating our lot like a commercial location where he could operate his food truck business. He presented financial projections showing how his food service could benefit both himself and the company through parking lot rental income. The situation became more complicated when other food trucks began showing up in our parking lot, apparently invited by Trevor to create what he called a food truck cluster that would attract customers from surrounding businesses. Our parking lot was suddenly hosting multiple commercial food vendors without any formal agreements or oversight. I had to inform Trevor that while we supported his entrepreneurial goals, he couldn't operate a commercial food truck business from our company parking lot without proper agreements and approvals. The immediate issue was that other businesses in our office park were complaining about the unauthorized commercial activity. Trevor was disappointed, but agreed to relocate his food truck operations to properly designated commercial areas. He continued working in our IT department while building his food service business at approved locations around the city. His cooking venture eventually became successful enough that he transitioned to full-time food service entrepreneurship. The experience taught me to be clearer about policies regarding employee use of company facilities for personal business ventures, even when those ventures seem harmless or beneficial to other employees. Sometimes good intentions and entrepreneurial spirit can create complicated situations that require careful management. That story is over. The progression from bringing fancy lunches to parking a full commercial food truck in the company lot without asking permission is genuinely impressive in its boldness. Trevor really thought he could just transform the office parking lot into a food truck hub and invite other vendors to join his mobile restaurant empire. The fact that he offered to pay rent after the fact shows he understood the commercial nature of what he was doing, but somehow thought surprising his employer with a food truck was better than asking first. Let's move on to a story about someone who had some very unique ideas about workplace time management. My co-worker started scheduling fake meetings to avoid actual work assignments. I work in the marketing department of a regional bank where we handle advertising campaigns, social media management, and community outreach programs. Our team consists of 6 marketing professionals who collaborate on various projects while maintaining individual areas of specialization. Last year, we hired Brandon as a marketing coordinator with experience in digital marketing and content creation. His resume showed solid experience with social media management, graphic design, and campaign development. During interviews, he seemed knowledgeable about current marketing trends and enthusiastic about contributing to our team's success. For his first month, Brandon appeared to be adjusting well to his new role. He participated actively in team meetings, asked thoughtful questions about our existing campaigns, and seemed eager to take on new responsibilities. His initial work quality was good, and he integrated smoothly with our existing team dynamics. But around his second month, I began noticing that Brandon always seemed to be in meetings when I tried to assign him new projects or discuss urgent deadlines. His calendar appeared packed with various appointments, conference calls, and collaborative sessions that made him appear constantly busy and unavailable for additional work. Initially, I assumed Brandon was simply being thorough about stakeholder communication and project coordination. Marketing work often requires extensive collaboration with different departments, and new employees sometimes overschedule meetings while learning organizational dynamics and building professional relationships. However, I became suspicious when I started paying closer attention to Brandon's meeting patterns. He would schedule hour-long appointments for discussions that typically required 15 minutes, book conference rooms for solo work sessions, and create recurring meetings with vague purposes like project planning or strategic review. The situation became more obvious when I tried to reach Brandon during one of his scheduled meetings and discovered that the conference room he had booked was empty. When I asked him about the meeting later, he explained that it had been cancelled at the last minute, but that he had used the time for important planning work that required a quiet environment. I began investigating Brandon's meeting schedule more systematically and found a pattern of appointments that didn't correspond to actual collaborative activities. He would schedule meetings with people who confirmed they hadn't been invited or informed about these supposed discussions. His calendar was filled with fictional collaborative activities. Brandon had become remarkably creative in generating legitimate-sounding meeting titles and descriptions. He scheduled campaign optimization sessions, stakeholder alignment meetings, creative development workshops, and performance analysis reviews that sounded important and necessary but didn't actually involve other participants or produce any meaningful outcomes. The most elaborate example was when Brandon blocked out an entire afternoon for what he called a cross-departmental strategy summit that supposedly involved representatives from multiple departments discussing integrated marketing approaches. When I checked with those departments, no one had been invited to or was aware of any such meeting. Brandon's fake meeting strategy was allowing him to avoid taking on new assignments while appearing to be fully engaged with important collaborative work. When asked about his availability for urgent projects, he could point to his packed calendar as evidence that he was already overwhelmed with critical responsibilities. The deception became obvious during a particularly busy period when we needed all team members to work on a time-sensitive campaign for a major product launch. Brandon claimed he couldn't contribute additional hours because he was committed to essential meetings throughout the week, but none of these meetings involved actual work related to our department's priorities. I confronted Brandon directly about his meeting schedule and asked him to provide details about the participants and objectives for several upcoming appointments. He became defensive and insisted that all his meetings were legitimate work activities, but couldn't provide specific information about attendees or expected outcomes. When I pointed out that several of his supposed meeting participants had no record of being invited or scheduled for these discussions, Brandon claimed there had been communication mix-ups and scheduling conflicts that explained the discrepancies. His explanations became increasingly vague and implausible. Brandon eventually admitted that he had been creating fake meetings to manage his workload and avoid taking on more responsibilities than he felt comfortable handling. He explained that he was feeling overwhelmed by the pace of work and thought that appearing busy would give him breathing room to focus on existing projects. I explained that avoiding new assignments through deceptive scheduling was not an acceptable approach to workload management, and that there were appropriate ways to discuss capacity concerns with supervisors. Brandon's fake meeting strategy had actually made his workload problems worse by preventing honest communication about realistic project timelines. We worked together to develop a more transparent approach to project management that allowed Brandon to communicate openly about his capacity limitations while still meeting department needs. He discontinued the fake meeting practice and began contributing more effectively to team projects through honest scheduling and workload discussions. That story is over. The creativity required to invent an entire fake meeting ecosystem, complete with official sounding titles and non-existent participants, is almost admirable in its elaborate deception. Brandon really thought he could just schedule his way out of actual work responsibilities, and nobody would notice his calendar was full of fictional collaborative activities. The cross-departmental strategy summit that involved 0 departments is peak fake meeting artistry. At least he eventually figured out that honest communication about workload was easier than maintaining a complex web of scheduling lies. Here's our next story about workplace boundaries that got pushed to their absolute limits. My boss started requiring employees to share their personal social media passwords for monitoring purposes. I work as a graphic designer at a small advertising agency that handles campaigns for local businesses and regional clients. The company employs about 15 people in various creative and account management roles, and we generally maintain a professional but relaxed work environment. Last month, our agency owner, Richard, announced new social media policies that he said were designed to protect the company's reputation and ensure that employee online activities didn't conflict with our client relationships or professional image. He presented these policies as necessary updates to keep pace with digital marketing industry standards. Richard explained that social media had become increasingly important for business reputation management, and that employee posts could potentially impact client relationships or create liability issues for the agency. He said that monitoring employee social media activity was becoming common practice in marketing and advertising firms. The initial policy seemed reasonable, requiring employees to avoid posting content that could be considered offensive, discriminatory, or harmful to the company's professional image. We were asked to be mindful of how our personal online presence might reflect on the agency and to use good judgment about sharing work-related information. But then Richard announced that all employees would be required to provide their personal social media account passwords to management for regular monitoring purposes. He said this would allow the company to proactively identify potential issues before they became problems and provide guidance about appropriate online behavior. Richard presented password sharing as a standard industry practice and suggested that employees who refused to comply might have something to hide or weren't committed to protecting the company's interests. He said that transparency about online activities was essential for maintaining trust between management and staff. Most employees were uncomfortable with surrendering their personal social media passwords to their employer, but Richard made it clear that compliance was mandatory for continued employment. He said that personal social media accounts weren't really personal when they could affect business relationships and professional reputation. I was particularly concerned about this policy because my social media accounts contained personal information about my family, private conversations with friends, and content that was completely unrelated to work activities. Giving my employer access to this private information felt like an unreasonable invasion of personal privacy. When several employees expressed concerns about the password requirement, Richard became defensive and accused us of not understanding modern business practices. He said that companies needed to protect themselves from employee social media mistakes, and that monitoring was the only way to ensure compliance with professional standards. Richard also mentioned that he had already been monitoring employee social media activities informally by searching for our profiles and reviewing publicly visible content. He said the password requirement would simply make this monitoring more efficient and comprehensive, rather than introducing a completely new practice. The situation escalated when Richard started scheduling individual meetings with employees to collect their social media passwords and demonstrate the monitoring process. He showed employees how he would review their posts, comments, and private messages to identify potential issues or policy violations. During my meeting with Richard, I expressed concerns about privacy and asked whether the monitoring would extend to private messages, family photos, and personal conversations that had nothing to do with work activities. Richard said that comprehensive monitoring was necessary and that employees shouldn't worry if they weren't doing anything inappropriate. I explained that I wasn't comfortable sharing passwords to accounts that contained private family information and personal communications that weren't relevant to my job performance or professional responsibilities. Richard responded by saying that privacy concerns were less important than protecting the company's reputation and client relationships. Several employees consulted with employment attorneys about the legality of mandatory social media password sharing, and we learned that this practice raised significant privacy concerns and might violate state laws protecting employee personal information and activities. When we presented Richard with information about potential legal issues related to his social media monitoring policy, he became angry and accused us of being uncooperative and disloyal to the company. He said that employees who weren't willing to be transparent about their online activities obviously had something to hide. The confrontation with Richard about social media monitoring created a hostile work environment where employees felt their personal privacy was being violated and their employment was threatened for refusing to surrender private account information. Several people began looking for new jobs rather than comply with the password requirement. Eventually, our concerns about the social media monitoring policy reached the agency's board of advisors, who immediately recognized the legal and ethical problems with requiring employee password sharing. They ordered Richard to discontinue the policy and apologize to employees for the inappropriate privacy violations. Richard was required to attend additional training about employment law and appropriate workplace policies. The social media monitoring policy was replaced with more reasonable guidelines about professional online behavior that didn't require surrendering personal account access to employers. That story is over. The complete invasion of requiring employees to hand over their personal social media passwords so their boss can read their private messages and family photos is absolutely dystopian. Richard really thought he could just demand access to people's entire digital lives and frame it as standard business practice. The idea that he was already informally stalking everyone's social media profiles and thought making it official would be an improvement shows a stunning lack of understanding about privacy and professional boundaries. Thank goodness someone had the sense to consult employment lawyers before this workplace surveillance nightmare went any further. If you enjoyed this batch, you will definitely love to listen to the other stories I have in store on my channel. Consider subscribing for more as I post Reddit story readings just like these every night. Sweet dreams and take care.